Welcome to Sheriff Files. Please like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where are you watching from tonight. Get comfortable, relax, and let's begin. This town hasn't had kids playing in that park since '84. But last night I heard them. 43 years I've worn this badge. 43 years of dealing with domestic disputes, drunk drivers, and the occasional meth lab tucked away in some trailer at the edge of the county. Nothing that would make headlines in the city papers. Nothing that would keep a man awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if what he saw was real or just the product of too many years breathing the stale air of this place we call home. But there are cases that stick with you. Cases that make you question whether the world operates according to the rules you thought you knew. This is one of those cases, and I'm telling it now because I figure it's time someone heard it. Time someone knew what happened here in the summer of 2019, when the old Millfield Park decided to come back to life. Millfield Park sits on the east side of town, where the streets start to crack and the houses lean a little too far to one side. Used to be the pride of our little community back in the 70s and early 80s. Had a nice playground, couple of basketball courts, picnic tables where families would gather on Sunday afternoons. The kind of place where kids would spend their summers, where teenage couples would sneak off to after dark. Then came 1984. Most folks around here don't like talking about what happened that summer. But if you press them, if you catch them after a few beers at Hannigan's Tavern, they might tell you about the Morrison boy. 8 years old, red hair, freckles, the kind of kid who was always getting into something. Found him at the bottom of the old storm drain that runs under the park. Coroner said he'd been there 3 days before anyone thought to look. What they don't tell you, what didn't make it into the official report, is that little Tommy Morrison was found sitting upright in that drain. Not lying down like you'd expect from a drowning. Sitting cross-legged in 2 feet of stagnant water, looking up at the concrete ceiling like he was waiting for something. After that, parents stopped bringing their kids to Millfield Park. City council talked about renovating it, maybe putting in new equipment, but somehow the funding never materialized. Years passed, and the place just faded. Swings rusted on their chains, basketball hoops lost their nets, and the grass grew tall enough to hide the broken bottles and other debris that accumulated like scar tissue. By the time I became sheriff in '94, Millfield Park was already a ghost of what it used to be. Just another forgotten corner of a town that seemed to specialize in forgetting things. I'd drive past it on my evening rounds, and sometimes I'd catch myself slowing down, looking through the chain-link fence at those empty swings. Never saw them move, not even in the wind. They hung there like hanged men, perfectly still, as if the very air around them had gone dead. That should have been my first warning. The calls started coming in on a Tuesday night in July. Mrs. Patterson on Elm Street, the one with the hearing aid and the 3 cats, called to complain about children playing in the park after midnight. "Sheriff," she said, her voice thin and irritated. "They're out there laughing and carrying on. Don't their parents know what time it is?" I told her I'd drive by and check it out, figuring it was probably teenagers drinking beer and trying to act tough. But when I rolled past Millfield Park at 12:30 that night, the place was empty as a tomb. Gates locked, swings hanging motionless, not a soul to be seen. Called Mrs. Patterson back the next morning to let her know I'd checked and found nothing. "Well, they were there," she insisted. "I heard them plain as day. Children laughing, having a grand old time. Went on for near an hour." I made a note in my log and forgot about it. Mrs. Patterson was 86 years old and lived alone with those cats. People that age, sometimes their minds play tricks on them. It happens. But then Jerry Vance called on Thursday night. Jerry's a good man, runs the hardware store, doesn't drink, doesn't make up stories. He was driving home from his sister's place around midnight when he heard what he described as the sound of kids having fun. Came from the direction of the old park, he told me. Sounded like maybe half a dozen children, laughing and playing. But Sheriff, when I drove past to look, I didn't see anybody. Gates were locked up tight, just like always. 2 calls about the same thing from 2 different people. That got my attention. I started making a point of swinging by Millfield Park every night around midnight, parking across the street with my headlights off, just watching. For a week, nothing. The place sat there in the darkness, silent and still, giving me plenty of time to think about other things. But on the second Thursday, as I sat there in my patrol car with the windows down and the radio turned low, I heard it. Laughter. Faint at first, like it was coming from far away, but definitely the sound of children at play. The kind of carefree, joyful noise you'd expect to hear on a summer afternoon, not at 12:15 in the morning in an abandoned park that hadn't seen a child in 35 years. I got out of the car and walked to the fence, straining to see through the darkness. The street lights cast long shadows across the park, but I could make out the playground equipment, the picnic tables, the swings hanging motionless from their chains. The laughter continued, seeming to echo from different parts of the park. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from the playground, sometimes from the basketball courts, sometimes from the area near the old storm drain where Tommy Morrison had been found all those years ago. But I couldn't see anyone. I took out my flashlight and swept it across the park, calling out that this was the sheriff and whoever was in there needed to come out and identify themselves. The laughter stopped immediately, cut off like someone had flipped a switch. I stood there for another 20 minutes, listening to the night sounds and the occasional car passing on the street behind me. Nothing. No movement, no voices, no sign that anyone had ever been there. The next morning, I called the city maintenance department and asked them to check the locks on the park gates. They reported back that everything was secure, no signs of tampering or forced entry. I also asked them to trim back some of the overgrown vegetation around the perimeter, thinking maybe kids had found a way to slip through a gap in the fence. But when I drove by that afternoon to check their work, something else caught my attention. The swings, which had hung perfectly still for as long as I could remember, were moving. Not much. Just a gentle back and forth motion, like someone had given them a soft push and walked away. But there was no wind that day. No breeze to speak of. The leaves on the trees around the park hung limp and motionless, and the flag at the nearby post office drooped from its pole like a wet rag. I stood there watching those swings move for 10 minutes, timing their motion, trying to figure out what could be causing it. They swayed in perfect unison, all 4 of them, maintaining the same rhythm as if they were connected by some invisible mechanism. Then, gradually, they slowed and came to a stop. I made another note in my log, but I didn't file an official report. What would I have written? Swings moving without apparent cause. The state police would have had me evaluated for fitness for duty. The calls kept coming in. Mrs. Patterson reported hearing children's voices 3 more times that week. Jerry Vance called again, and so did the night shift supervisor at the paper mill, who heard laughter while stepping outside for a smoke break. Each time, I responded by driving to the park, and each time I found it empty. But I was starting to hear it too. Not every night, but often enough to establish a pattern. Always around midnight, always the sound of children at play. Sometimes I could make out individual voices, a girl giggling, a boy calling out to his friends, the rhythmic squeak of swing chains in motion. But when I tried to focus on any specific sound, it would fade away, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined it. I started bringing a tape recorder on my midnight rounds, thinking I could capture evidence of what was happening. But every time I pressed record, the sounds would stop. The silence that followed felt different from ordinary quiet, heavier, more oppressive, like the park itself was holding its breath. It was during the third week of this routine that I noticed the smell. Cotton candy and popcorn. The unmistakable aroma of a carnival or county fair, sweet and nostalgic, drifting on the night air around Millfield Park. It would come and go with the phantom laughter, strongest near the old concession stand that had been boarded up since the Reagan administration. I mentioned this to Doc Harrison during my annual physical, asking if stress or medication might cause olfactory hallucinations. He gave me a concerned look and asked if I'd been having any other unusual symptoms. Just curious, I told him, but I could see the worry in his eyes. That night, I decided to approach the situation differently. Instead of parking across the street, I pulled into the lot adjacent to the park and positioned my patrol car where I had a clear view of the playground equipment. If there was something happening in there, some rational explanation for the sounds and the moving swings, I was going to find it. Midnight came and went. 12:15. 12:30. At 12:47, the laughter started again. But this time, I could see them. Not clearly. They appeared as vague shapes in the darkness, translucent figures that seemed to flicker in and out of existence like images on a badly tuned television. Children, maybe 5 or 6 of them, running between the playground equipment, chasing each other in some eternal game of tag. I sat perfectly still, afraid that any movement would cause them to disappear. Through my windshield, I watched a small figure climb to the top of the slide and pause there, as if surveying the park before making its descent. Another child ran to the swings and began pumping their legs, rising higher and higher into the night sky. The sounds matched what I was seeing: delighted squeals from the slide, the rhythmic creaking of swing chains, the patter of small feet running across the worn dirt paths. But the figures themselves remained indistinct, like shadows cast by a light source I couldn't identify. I reached for my radio to call for backup, then stopped. What would I tell them? That I was watching ghost children play in an abandoned park? They'd have me relieved of duty before sunrise. Instead, I slowly opened my car door and stepped outside. The activity continued for several seconds after I stood up, long enough for me to get a better look at what I was seeing. The children appeared to be dressed in clothing from decades past. The boys in short pants and striped shirts, the girls in simple dresses that fluttered as they ran. Their hairstyles looked like something from an old family photograph, and there was a quality to their movements that seemed both energetic and oddly formal, as if they were performing some elaborate dance whose steps had been choreographed long ago. Then one of them noticed me. A girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, stopped running and turned in my direction. Even from a distance of 50 yards, even through the darkness and the chain-link fence, I could feel her looking at me. The other children stopped playing as well, all of them turning to stare at the man in the sheriff's uniform who had interrupted their midnight game. The silence that followed was absolute. No traffic sounds from the street, no hum of electrical lines, no buzz of insects. Even my own heartbeat seemed to fade away, leaving me standing in a pocket of perfect quiet that felt heavier than sleep. Then the girl raised her hand and waved at me. Not a friendly greeting, but something else. A gesture that felt more like a summons, an invitation to join their game. The other children began waving too, their pale hands moving back and forth in the darkness like flowers swaying in a breeze that only they could feel. I took a step toward the fence, then another. My rational mind was screaming warnings, telling me that what I was seeing couldn't be real, that I needed to get back in my car and drive away. But there was something compelling about those waving figures, something that made me want to get closer, to see their faces more clearly, to understand what they wanted from me. I had taken perhaps half a dozen steps when I heard another sound. A voice, adult and urgent, calling my name from somewhere behind me. I turned and saw headlights approaching from the direction of town, another police car, moving fast with its emergency lights flashing. When I looked back at the park, the children were gone. The swing sets hung motionless, the playground equipment stood empty, and the only sound was the approaching siren of my deputy's patrol car. Whatever I had seen, whatever had been happening in Millfield Park, had vanished the moment I'd been distracted. Deputy Martinez pulled up beside my car and rolled down his window. "Sheriff? We got a call about suspicious activity in the area. Someone reported seeing lights in the park." I looked back at the empty playground, then at Martinez's concerned face. "False alarm," I told him. "Everything's quiet here." But that wasn't true, and we both knew it. The park wasn't quiet, it was waiting. After Martinez left, I sat in my car for another hour, watching and listening. Nothing happened. The place returned to its usual state of abandoned neglect, giving no sign that it had recently hosted a gathering of children who had been dead for 35 years. I drove home that night with more questions than answers, and I spent the following day researching the history of Millfield Park in the county records and old newspaper archives. What I found didn't surprise me, but it didn't comfort me either. The park had been built in 1967 on the site of the old Millfield Elementary School, which had burned down in 1965. 15 children and 2 teachers had died in that fire, trapped in a second-floor classroom when the building's only staircase was consumed by flames. The victims had ranged in age from 6 to 10 years old. Among the dead was a girl named Sarah Beth Collins, 8 years old, red hair, photographed for the memorial service in a simple white dress. In the newspaper photo, she was waving at the camera. I recognized that wave. The town had built the park as a memorial to the children who had died in the fire, with a small plaque near the entrance that few people bothered to read anymore. For nearly 20 years, Millfield Park had served its intended purpose, providing a place where local families could gather and children could play. Then Tommy Morrison had been found in the storm drain, and everything changed. I spent the next several nights driving past the park at different times, trying to establish whether the activity followed a predictable schedule. What I discovered was that the children appeared only at midnight, and only when I was alone. If Martinez or one of the other deputies accompanied me on patrol, the park remained silent and still. But when I came by myself, they were always there, playing their eternal games in the shadow of rusted equipment and overgrown grass. I began to recognize individual figures among the group. The girl who had waved at me, Sarah Beth, I was certain, seemed to be the leader. She would direct the others to different parts of the park, organizing their activities with the authority of an older sister or a playground monitor. There was a boy with dark hair who favored the monkey bars, and twin girls who always played together near the seesaw that hadn't moved in decades. And there was one more child, smaller than the others, who stayed apart from the group. A boy with red hair who sat alone by the storm drain, watching the others play but never joining in. Tommy Morrison, I realized. The boy who had died in 1984, condemned to spend eternity in the place where his life had ended. The rational part of my mind kept insisting that what I was seeing had to be some form of hallucination brought on by stress, lack of sleep, or the early stages of some neurological condition. But the details were too consistent, too specific. These weren't random images conjured by a tired mind. They were individuals with distinct appearances and behaviors, recreating the same activities night after night with the precision of actors following a well-rehearsed script. I started keeping more detailed notes, documenting the times of their appearances, the games they played, the way they interacted with each other and with the environment around them. The picture that emerged was both heartbreaking and terrifying. These children were trapped, doomed to repeat the same innocent activities for eternity, unaware that decades had passed since their deaths. They played with the joy and enthusiasm of the living, but their games never ended, never provided the satisfaction that would allow them to rest. And they were beginning to notice that I was watching them. It started with subtle changes in their behavior. Instead of ignoring my presence across the fence, they would pause in their activities to look in my direction. Sometimes one of them would point at me, causing the others to turn and stare. Their attention felt different from ordinary curiosity, more intense, more purposeful, as if they were studying me the same way I was studying them. Then came the night when Sarah Beth approached the fence. I was sitting in my usual spot, documenting the evening's activities in my notebook, when I looked up to find her standing just a few feet away on the other side of the chain-link barrier. Up close, she looked even more like the memorial photograph. The same red hair, the same white dress, the same gentle smile. But her eyes were wrong. They held an intelligence and awareness that no 8-year-old should possess, a depth of knowledge that seemed to encompass not just her own death but the deaths of all the children who played in this forgotten place. She pressed her small hands against the fence and spoke to me for the first time. "Why don't you come play with us?" Her voice was exactly what you'd expect from a child her age, high and sweet, tinged with the natural friendliness that children show to trusted adults. But there was something underneath it, a quality that reminded me of deep water moving in the darkness. "I'm working," I told her, not sure if she could hear me or if I was talking to myself. "You're always working," she said. "You come here every night, but you never play. Don't you want to have fun?" Behind her, the other children had stopped their games and were gathering near the fence. They watched our conversation with the intense focus of an audience, as if this exchange was the most important thing that had ever happened in their small world. "I'm too old for playground games," I said. Sarah Beth tilted her head to one side, considering this. "Tommy was 8 when he came to play with us," she said. "But he's been 8 for a very long time now. Time works differently here. You could be 8 again too, if you wanted." The boy with red hair looked up from his solitary position by the storm drain, and for the first time, I saw him smile. "Come play with us," Sarah Beth repeated. "We've been waiting for someone new." I closed my notebook and stood up, taking a step back from the fence. "I have to go," I said. "You'll come back," she said with the certainty of a child who has never been disappointed. "You always come back." As I walked to my car, I could hear them resuming their games behind me, but the sound seemed different now. The laughter carried an edge of anticipation, and the rhythmic creaking of the swings sounded like a countdown. I didn't return to Millfield Park for 3 nights after that conversation. Instead, I assigned the midnight patrol to Martinez, telling him I needed to catch up on paperwork. But staying away didn't help. The children had gotten inside my head, and I found myself thinking about them constantly. Their pale faces, their old-fashioned clothes, the way they had gathered around the fence like believers waiting for salvation. Most disturbing of all was the memory of Sarah Beth's offer. The possibility that I could join their eternal games, could become 8 years old again and play forever in a world where time had no meaning. The idea terrified me, but it also held a strange appeal. What did I have in the real world that was worth preserving? A small town job that mostly involved writing traffic tickets and breaking up bar fights? An empty house where I ate dinner alone and watched television until it was time to go to bed. A life that had somehow slipped past me while I was busy maintaining order in a place where nothing important ever happened. On the 4th night, I couldn't stay away any longer. When I arrived at the park, the children were already waiting for me. All of them, including Tommy Morrison, stood pressed against the fence like prisoners pleading for release. But it was clear that I was the one who was trapped, drawn back to this place by forces I didn't understand and couldn't resist. "We knew you'd come back," Sarah Beth said. "We've been planning a special game just for you." "What kind of game?" I asked. "Hide and seek," said one of the twin girls. "We hide, and you try to find us. But you have to come inside to play," added her sister. I looked at the locked gate, the sturdy chain and padlock that the city maintenance crew had assured me was secure. "I can't get in," I said. "The gate is locked." Sarah Beth smiled and shook her head. "Locks are for the living," she said. "Watch." She turned and walked toward the gate, her small figure passing through the chain-link fence as if it were made of mist. The other children followed, stepping through the metal barrier without resistance, until they were all standing on my side of the park. Free. They surrounded me in the parking lot, their faces turned up toward mine with expressions of innocent expectation. Up close, I could see details that hadn't been visible from a distance. The careful way their hair had been combed, the small imperfections in their clothing that spoke of real children who had once lived real lives, the faint luminescence that seemed to emanate from their skin. "Now we can really play," said the dark-haired boy. "You're it," announced one of the twins. They scattered in different directions, some running back through the fence into the park, others disappearing into the shadows between buildings, their laughter echoing off the empty streets. Within seconds I was alone in the parking lot, standing beside my patrol car with my heart hammering against my ribs. This was wrong. Everything about this situation violated the natural order of things, but I couldn't make myself get in the car and drive away. The children were counting on me to play their game, and somehow that obligation felt more important than my duty as a sheriff, more compelling than my instinct for self-preservation. I took out my flashlight and began searching for them. The first child I found was Tommy Morrison, sitting in his usual spot by the storm drain. But when I approached him, he giggled and sank into the ground, disappearing through the concrete like it was water. "You found me," his voice called from somewhere below. "But you have to catch me too." I knelt beside the drain and shone my light into the opening. Instead of the shallow stream of stagnant water I expected to see, the tunnel stretched away into darkness, deeper than should have been possible given the local topography. And from that darkness came the sound of running water, and children's voices calling to each other in the distance. I stood up and backed away from the drain, but I could still hear them down there, still hear Tommy Morrison laughing as he splashed through water that shouldn't exist in a place that couldn't be real. The next child I found was hiding behind the old concession stand, but when I called out that I'd seen her, she ran straight through the brick wall and vanished. The dark-haired boy was sitting on top of the monkey bars, 30 feet off the ground, waving at me before leaping down and passing through the earth like it was empty air. Each time I found one of them, they would disappear and reappear somewhere else, always just out of reach, always laughing, always calling for me to keep playing their impossible game. As the night wore on, I began to understand the rules. This wasn't ordinary hide and seek, it was a test, a challenge designed to see how far I was willing to go to be part of their world. They wanted me to follow them through walls and down into impossible spaces, to abandon the physical laws that governed my existence, and embrace the freedom that came with being dead. "You're almost ready," Sarah Beth said, appearing beside me as I stood panting in the middle of the basketball court. "Just a little further." "Ready for what?" I asked. "To stop being alone," she said. "To stop being tired. To stop being old." She was right about all of those things. I was tired. Tired of the job, tired of the empty house, tired of the gradual accumulation of losses that comes with age. The children's world offered an alternative to all of that, a place where time moved differently and the games never had to end. "What happened to the others?" I asked. "The people who played your games before me?" Sarah Beth's expression didn't change. but something shifted in her eyes. "They're still playing," she said. "They're always playing." That's when I noticed the other figures moving in the shadows at the edge of the park. Adult shapes, harder to see than the children but definitely present, wandering between the trees with the slow, purposeless movements of people who had forgotten why they were there. "Mrs. Patterson," I whispered, recognizing the elderly woman who had first called to complain about children playing in the park. "She loves hide and seek," Sarah Beth said. "She's gotten very good at it." I saw Jerry Vance too, standing motionless beside the basketball court, staring up at the sky with the blank expression of someone who had been waiting for something for a very long time. "How many?" I asked. "Everyone who hears us," Sarah Beth said. "Everyone who comes to watch. Everyone who wants to play." The truth hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about dead children trapped in an abandoned park. It was about a growing collection of souls, drawn in by loneliness and the promise of eternal companionship, condemned to spend forever playing games that never reached a conclusion. And I was next. "I have to go," I said, backing toward the fence. "But the game isn't over," protested one of the twins. "You haven't found all of us yet. You haven't caught anyone," added her sister. "The game is never over," said Sarah Beth, and now her voice carried the weight of decades, the accumulated sadness of all the lost children who had been trapped in this place since the fire that killed them in 1965. "That's what makes it fun." I turned and ran for my car, but the fence was no longer where it should have been. The parking lot seemed to stretch on forever, and no matter how fast I moved, my patrol car remained impossibly distant. Behind me, the children were laughing and giving chase, their feet making no sound on the pavement as they closed the distance between us. I could hear Sarah Beth calling my name, her voice bright with the anticipation of someone who had finally found a new playmate. "Sheriff! Don't you want to play with us? Don't you want to be happy?" I did want that. God help me, I wanted it more than I had ever wanted anything in my life. The promise of eternal childhood, of friendship and laughter and games that would never end, called to something deep inside me that had been buried under decades of responsibility and disappointment. But I also remembered the blank expressions on the faces of the adults I had seen wandering in the shadows, and I knew that whatever happiness the children offered came at a price that was too high to pay. I forced myself to stop running and turn around. The children had formed a semicircle behind me, their faces bright with excitement and expectation. Sarah Beth stepped forward, her hand extended like she was inviting me to dance. "It's time to choose," she said. "You can keep being old and tired and alone, or you can come play with us forever." "What about the others?" I asked. "The adults who chose to play. Are they happy?" For the first time, Sarah Beth's smile faltered. "They're different now," she admitted. "Adults don't play the same way children do. They forget how to have fun. But they stay anyway. They can't leave," she said simply. "None of us can leave." I looked around at the park, at the rusted equipment and overgrown paths, at the place where 15 children had been playing when a fire stole their lives 65 years ago. They had been trapped here ever since, growing neither older nor wiser, doomed to repeat the same innocent activities while the world moved on without them. And now they wanted me to join them. "I'm sorry," I said, "but I can't." Sarah Beth's face crumpled with disappointment, and for a moment she looked exactly like the 8-year-old girl she had been when she died. "Please," she whispered. "We've been alone for so long." "You're not alone," I told her. "You have each other." "It's not the same," said Tommy Morrison, speaking for the first time since I'd found him by the storm drain. "We need someone who remembers what it was like to be alive." I understood then what they were really asking for. Not just another playmate, but a connection to the living world they had lost. Someone who could bridge the gap between their eternal childhood and the adult existence they would never experience. But I also understood that becoming that bridge would mean giving up everything that made me human. "I have to go," I said again. This time, when I turned toward my car, it was right where I had left it. The fence was back in its proper place, and the parking lot had returned to its normal dimensions. The children watched silently as I walked away, their faces filled with the kind of sadness that only comes from profound disappointment. I drove home that night knowing I would never return to Millfield Park after midnight. The children would continue their eternal games without me, waiting for the next lonely soul who might hear their laughter and decide to investigate. But I also knew that my life had been fundamentally changed by what I had experienced. The knowledge that the dead could linger in places of trauma, that loneliness could be so powerful it transcended death itself, would stay with me for the rest of my days. I retired from the sheriff's department 6 months later, citing health concerns that weren't entirely fictional. The nightmares had started soon after my last visit to the park, dreams in which I was 8 years old again, playing hide and seek with children who had been dead for decades. Sometimes, in those dreams, Sarah Beth would find me hiding and tag me as it. And sometimes, I would wake up to find my hand glowing with the same faint luminescence I had seen on the children's skin. The new sheriff, a young man from the state police who doesn't know the history of this place, occasionally asks me about local crime patterns and problem areas. I always make sure to mention that Millfield Park requires regular surveillance, especially around midnight. "Any particular reason?" he asked the last time we talked. "Just keep an eye on it," I told him. "Sometimes places like that attract the wrong kind of attention." He nodded and made a note, probably thinking I was referring to drug dealers or teenage vandals. He has no idea that the park's real dangers are far more subtle, far more patient, than any living criminal. Mrs. Patterson's house sits empty now, a for sale sign in the front yard that has been there for 2 years without attracting any serious buyers. Jerry Vance's hardware store closed down after his nephew couldn't figure out where Jerry had gone. The official reports list both of them as missing persons, but I know better. They're still in the park, playing their eternal games with children who died before they were born. And sometimes, when I drive past Millfield Park on my way to the grocery store or the doctor's office, I can hear them. Faint laughter drifting on the wind, the rhythmic squeak of swing chains moving without any visible cause, the sound of small feet running across packed earth. The children are still there, still waiting, still hoping that the next person who hears them will be willing to stay and play. I hope they're wrong, but I know they're not. This town hasn't had kids playing in that park since '84. But they're playing there now, every night at midnight, in a game that will never end. And they're always looking for new players. I don't care how bad the drought gets, nobody drinks from that well. Been telling folks that for 37 years now, ever since I pinned this badge to my chest and started walking the streets of Cedar Falls. Most people listen. The smart ones, anyway. They nod and give me that look you give an old-timer who's seen too much. Then they go about their business with their store-bought water and their municipal taps. But every few years, someone new comes to town. Someone who doesn't know the history. Someone who thinks an old stone well behind the Hartwell place might be the answer to their problems. That's when I have to tell this story again. The summer of '98 was the kind that bakes the sense right out of a man. Temperature hadn't dropped below 95 in 6 weeks, and the Cascade River was nothing more than a muddy trickle threading between cracked stones. Lawns turned to dust. Gardens withered despite folks watering them twice a day. Even the old-timers, the ones who remembered the drought of '76, said they'd never seen anything like it. That's when the Hartwell well started calling to people. The Hartwell farm sat 3 miles outside town, up where the county road peters out into gravel and good intentions. Family that built it came west in 1884, stonemasons from somewhere back east who knew how to work with their hands. They sunk that well deep, deeper than anyone had business digging in those days. Lined it with fitted stones that looked older than they should have, darker than the local granite. By the time I was a boy, stories were already growing around that place like weeds after rain. Old Heinrich Hartwell, the last of the line, used to tell anyone who'd listen that the well water tasted like copper pennies and old prayers. Said it never ran dry, not even in the worst years. Said sometimes, if you listen real careful, you could hear things moving down there in the dark. Heinrich died in '94, left the place to some cousin back in Pennsylvania who never bothered to claim it. Property taxes went unpaid. Weeds took the garden. The house settled into its bones and waited. But the well kept flowing. First person to hear it was Jenny Morrison. 23 years old, working 2 jobs to keep her and her boy fed while her husband drank away their rent money at Murphy's Bar. She'd driven out to the Hartwell place on a Tuesday morning, looking for anything she could salvage. Scrap metal, maybe some copper pipe. The kind of desperate salvage work that drought years breed. She came back to town around noon, face white as paper, hands shaking so bad she could barely hold her car keys. Found me at the diner, working through my usual coffee and thinking about the heat. She slid into the booth across from me without invitation, eyes wide and wet. "Sheriff," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "That old well behind the Hartwell place. It knows my name." I set down my coffee, studied her face. Jenny wasn't the type for dramatics. Worked hard, kept to herself, dealt with her troubles without complaint. If she said something spooked her, something had. "Tell me what happened." She wrapped her hands around the water glass I slid across to her, stared into it like she was seeing things I couldn't. "I was just looking around, you know. Seeing if there was anything worth taking. The well's got this stone cover on it, heavy thing, but there's gaps between the stones. I could hear water moving down there. Fresh water, Sheriff. In this heat." She took a sip, grimaced like the municipal water tasted wrong after what she'd heard out there. "I was getting ready to leave when I heard it. Quiet at first, like wind through trees. But there wasn't any wind. Then it got clearer." She looked up at me, eyes bright with unshed tears. "It was calling my name. Jenny," it said. "Jenny Morrison. Come back, Jenny. Come back home." I drove out there that afternoon. The Hartwell place squatted under the brutal sun like something that had given up hope. Paint peeled from weathered siding in long, tired strips. The porch sagged under the weight of years and neglect. Windows stared out at nothing with the flat, empty gaze of abandoned things. The whole property felt wrong somehow, like stepping into a room where someone had just stopped breathing. The well stood 50 yards behind the house, a perfect circle of fitted stones rising maybe 3 feet above the yellow grass. The stones were dark, darker than they should have been in that heat, and slick with something that wasn't quite moisture. The iron windlass that had once held a bucket was gone, leaving just a wooden frame standing guard over the opening. Heavy stone slabs covered most of the mouth, but gaps remained between them, wide enough for a man to slip through, if he was fool enough to try. I knelt beside the rim, listened. Water moved down there. Deep water, the kind that whispers against stone walls in the dark. And underneath that sound, something else. Something that might have been wind, if wind could carry words. I didn't hear my name that day, but I heard something. The calls started coming in 2 days later. First was Tom Bradley, who ran the hardware store. He'd driven out to check on a property survey, maybe put in a bid if the taxes stayed unpaid long enough. Came back talking about voices in the water, voices that knew things about him. Things he never told another soul. Then Sarah Chin, the new librarian. She'd gone out with some fool idea about photographing abandoned places for a book she was writing. Said the well called to her for 20 minutes straight, told her secrets about the town that nobody living should know. By the end of the week, I had 6 people telling me the same impossible story. The well knew their names, knew their histories, knew things that only they knew, things they buried deep and never planned to dig up again. That's when I started patrolling the county road. Parked my cruiser where I could see anyone heading toward the Hartwell place. Turned away 3 more people over the next 2 days. Told them the property was under investigation, which wasn't exactly a lie. I was investigating in my own way. Trying to understand what kind of thing could call to people by name, could know their secrets, could make grown adults drive 3 miles into the middle of nowhere just to listen to water moving in the dark. The drought kept getting worse. Rivers dried up. Wells went empty. The municipal system started rationing water, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night. People got desperate. Desperate people do desperate things. That's when Marcus Webb decided to go digging. Marcus was new to town, had moved up from Phoenix with some story about a fresh start and new opportunities. Worked construction when he could find it, lived in a rented trailer on the bad side of what we generously called downtown. The kind of man who saw problems as things to be solved with the right tools and enough determination. He'd heard the stories about the Hartwell well, same as everyone else. But where others heard warnings, Marcus heard opportunity. Fresh water, unlimited supply, just waiting for someone smart enough to tap into it. He bought climbing rope and a headlamp from Tom Bradley's hardware store. Told Tom he was planning to do some cave exploring up in the state forest. Tom called me as soon as Marcus left the store. I found Marcus's truck parked behind the Hartwell house around sundown, rope and gear laid out beside the well like surgical instruments. The stone slabs had been moved, pushed aside to create an opening wide enough for a man to descend. The climbing rope disappeared into that opening, anchored to the wooden windlass frame. Marcus was gone. I called his name, got no answer except the whisper of water against stone walls somewhere far below. Aimed my flashlight down into the well, saw the beam swallowed by darkness so complete it seemed solid. The rope hung straight and still, like it was supporting nothing at all. Called for backup, got Jimmy Patterson and his volunteer fire department crew out there within the hour. We lowered a rescue line, called down into the well until our voices went hoarse. Nothing came back but echoes and the sound of moving water. Jimmy volunteered to go down. Good man, Jimmy. Brave in the way that small-town heroes are brave, without thinking too hard about consequences. We lowered him on a safety line, watched his light disappear into the earth like a falling star. He came back up 20 minutes later, face gray with something that wasn't just exertion. "There's no bottom," he said while we helped him over the rim. "I went down 200 feet, maybe more. The walls just keep going. And Sheriff," he looked at me with eyes that had seen too much, "I could hear them talking down there. All of them. Every person who ever went down that well. They're still down there, talking to each other in the dark." We sealed the well that night. Dragged the stone slabs back into place, poured concrete into the gaps, wrapped the whole thing in police tape and official warnings. Posted signs on the property, made it clear that anyone found trespassing would face the full weight of the law. But concrete doesn't stop whispers. And police tape doesn't silence things that live in the deep places of the earth. The voices kept calling. People still drove out to the Hartwell place, drawn by dreams of fresh water and deeper thirsts they couldn't name. I caught most of them, turned them away with warnings and stern words about property rights and public safety. But some got through. some always get through. Over the years, I learned to recognize the signs. The glassy look in their eyes, like they were listening to something only they could hear. The way they'd stand at the edge of the property, staring toward the well with expressions of longing so intense it was painful to watch. The way they'd return, again and again, until something finally called them home. Mrs. Patterson was the next to go missing. Jimmy's wife, sweet woman who'd lived in Cedar Falls her whole life, raised 3 children and buried 2 husbands before she married Jimmy late in life. Found her car parked behind the Hartwell house on a Tuesday morning in October, doors unlocked, keys still in the ignition. The concrete we'd poured was cracked and broken, stone slabs pushed aside like they weighed nothing at all. Fresh climbing rope disappeared into the well. Rope that hadn't been there the day before. This time, I didn't call for backup. This time, I went down myself. The darkness in that well wasn't natural. Wasn't the simple absence of light that you'd expect in a deep place. This was something older, hungrier. My flashlight beam seemed to die just a few feet from the lens, swallowed by shadows that moved like living things. The walls were smooth stone, fitted so perfectly you couldn't slide a knife blade between the blocks. But they weren't the same stones we'd seen from above. These were darker, older, carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The kind of marks that seemed to shift and crawl when you weren't watching them straight on. I descended for what felt like hours, though my watch insisted it was only minutes. The temperature dropped with each foot, until my breath came out in visible puffs and my fingers went numb despite the gloves. The sound of water grew louder, but I never reached it. Just kept going down and down, past stone walls that whispered secrets in languages I didn't recognize. That's when I heard them talking. Voices in the darkness below, echoing off walls I couldn't see. Marcus Webb, discussing construction techniques with someone who sounded like they'd been dead for decades. Mrs. Patterson, sharing recipes with women who'd never seen an electric stove. Jenny Morrison's boy, playing word games with children who'd stopped breathing before his grandparents were born. They weren't screaming. They weren't begging for rescue. They were talking, laughing, sharing stories like old friends gathering around a dinner table. Like they'd found exactly what they'd been looking for in the deep places of the earth. I climbed back up as fast as my old arms would carry me. Sealed the well again, this time with steel plates and industrial adhesive. Posted a deputy on rotating patrol. Made sure someone was always watching the place. But steel doesn't hold what lives in the deep places. And human attention can't guard against things that work in the spaces between thoughts. The well kept calling. Still calls, far as I know. Every few years, someone new comes to town. Someone who doesn't know the history, doesn't understand the warnings. They hear stories about fresh water and unlimited supply, about an old well that never runs dry. They drive out to the Hartwell place with rope and lights and good intentions. Most of them I catch in time. Turn them away with warnings about property rights and public safety. Watch them drive back to town with disappointed faces and practical minds. But some get through. Some always get through. The thing about living in a small town is that you learn to count. Count the faces you see at the grocery store, the voices you hear at town meetings, the cars that pass your house on quiet Sunday mornings. When someone goes missing, you feel the absence like a missing tooth. Cedar Falls has gotten smaller over the years. Not just from people moving away, though plenty have done that. From people who started dreaming about fresh water in deep places, who began standing at their windows at night looking toward the old county road with expressions of longing too intense to bear. I retired last spring, handed the badge over to a young woman who's got the sense to listen when old-timers tell her stories she doesn't want to believe. Told her everything about the Hartwell place, about the well that calls to people by name, about the voices that whisper in the darkness below. she listens. The smart ones always do. But every summer, when the heat gets bad and the rivers run low, I see people standing at the edge of town looking out toward the county road. Looking toward a place where fresh water waits in unlimited supply, where voices in the darkness know their names and histories and secrets they've never told another soul. Looking toward home. That's why I keep telling this story. That's why I post the warnings and pay for the patrols and make sure the steel plates stay welded tight. Because the thing about wells is that they're not just holes in the ground. They're connections. Doorways. Invitations to places that exist in the deep spaces beneath our feet and behind our thoughts. The Heartwell well still calls to people. Still knows their names, still promises things they've been searching for their whole lives without knowing it. Still offers fresh water and deeper thirsts, still whispers secrets that only the darkness knows. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the heat presses down like a living thing and the municipal water tastes like rust and broken promises, I find myself standing at my bedroom window looking out toward the county road. Listening to voices that seem to drift on the still air, voices that know my name and my history and all the secrets I buried in 37 years of wearing this badge. Voices that sound like old friends, like family, like people who found exactly what they were looking for in the deep places of the earth. Voices that call me home. But I don't go. Haven't gone yet anyway. Because someone has to keep watching. Someone has to keep telling the story, keep posting the warnings, keep turning away the desperate and the thirsty and the lost. Someone has to remember that wells aren't just holes in the ground. They're invitations. And some invitations are better left unanswered. I don't care how bad the drought gets, nobody drinks from that well. But Lord help me, some nights I dream about the taste of water that never runs dry. I never noticed him till last week. But he's been there, in every unsolved case this town's ever had. 43 years I wore the badge in Millbrook County. 43 years of domestic disturbances, bar fights, and the occasional breaking and entering that made the front page of our weekly paper. Small-town law enforcement, they call it, though there's nothing small about the weight of secrets a place like this can hold. Nothing small about the way certain cases gnaw at you, decades later, like splinters working their way to the surface of your skin. I found him by accident, if you can call it that. Been going through the old case files. Retirement will do that to a man, make him sentimental about things better left buried. The county's digitizing everything now, scanning photographs and reports that haven't seen daylight since Carter was president. Young Deputy Morrison brought me a box last Tuesday, said the new sheriff thought I might want to sort through my old cases before they got filed away forever. The Hendricks murder was on top. 1987. Louise Hendricks, 42, found beaten to death in her kitchen on Elm Street. Husband had an alibi solid as concrete. He was in County General having his appendix out when it happened. No forced entry, nothing stolen, no witnesses. Case went cold within 6 months. I pulled out the crime scene photos, same ones I'd stared at for years back then, looking for something I missed. The kitchen table overturned. Louise's body by the refrigerator, one arm stretched toward the phone she never reached. Blood spatter on the linoleum, already turning brown in the camera's flash. And there, in the background, through the kitchen window, a figure. Blurry, indistinct, like someone had moved just as the shutter clicked. I noticed it before, chalked it up to reflection, maybe a neighbor in their yard. But last Tuesday, something made me look closer. Made me get out the magnifying glass I keep for reading these days. The figure was watching. Even through the blur you could tell. The way he stood, perfectly still except for that motion that had caused the camera to catch him long. Like he'd been there a long time, watching, and only moved when he realized someone was taking pictures. I set the photo aside and reached for another file. The Morrison boy, no relation to my deputy, 1994. 8 years old, found dead in the woods behind the elementary school. Coroner said natural causes, some kind of heart defect nobody knew he had. But the timing was wrong. Kid was healthy as a horse Monday morning, dead by Thursday afternoon, and nobody could explain what he'd been doing in those woods. The photograph showed where we found him, peaceful as if he just laid down for a nap among the fallen leaves. October light filtering through bare branches, giving everything that golden cast autumn gets right before winter settles in for good. And there he was again. Deeper in the trees this time, barely visible through the maze of oak and maple. Same blurry quality, same sense of someone who'd been perfectly still until the moment the camera captured him. This time I was sure he was watching, not the boy, but us. The investigators, the coroner, me standing there trying to make sense of something that had no sense to be made of. My hands were shaking when I reached for the third file. The Brennan Fire, 1979. Whole family gone in one night, mother, father, twin daughters age 16. Fire department said electrical, but I never bought it. House was only 10 years old, wiring was solid. Nobody smoked, no candles burning, nothing that should have sparked that kind of inferno. The photo was taken the morning after, when the smoke had cleared enough to see what was left. Foundation and chimney, mostly. Some pieces of furniture that hadn't burned all the way through. And standing across the street, watching the cleanup crews work. Him. Clearer this time, though still that unsettling blur around the edges. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like a dark coat. Face obscured by shadow or maybe just the way the light fell, but you could feel him watching. Patient. Like he had all the time in the world. I spent the rest of that day going through files. The Crawford drowning, 1981. Little girl who somehow fell through ice on a pond that hadn't been frozen the day before. There he was, a dark smudge among the rescue workers. The Sommer disappearance, 1989. Teenage boy who vanished walking home from basketball practice, never found. In the search photo taken near the school, that familiar figure stood at the edge of the frame, watching us comb through the woods. Every unsolved case. Every death that didn't make sense, every disappearance that left families staring at empty chairs around the dinner table. And in every crime scene photograph, if you knew where to look, if you had the patience to study the backgrounds and the shadows, he was there. By Thursday, I'd filled 2 pages with notes. Dates, locations, details about each case. The pattern was unmistakable, but it was also impossible. The photos spanned nearly 30 years. Even if it was the same person, and how could it be, he never seemed to age. Never changed. Just that tall, thin figure in dark clothes, always at the edges, always watching. I called the state police Friday morning, spoke to Detective Rourke who'd helped me on a few cases over the years. Told him I had something he might want to see. Something about those old unsolved cases from Millbrook County. He drove down Saturday afternoon, spent 3 hours going through the files. "You sure these are all different scenes?" he asked, holding up the Hendricks photo next to the one from the Morrison boy. 7 years apart, I told him. Different locations, different investigators, different photographers. Rourke set the photos down and rubbed his eyes. He'd been a cop longer than I had, seen things that would turn most people's hair white. But his hands were steady when he picked up the magnifying glass, and his voice was careful when he spoke. Could be coincidence. Trick of light, shadows, maybe something on the camera lens. Every time, people see patterns where there aren't any. Mind's way of making sense of things that don't have sense. But he kept looking at the photos. Kept going back to that figure in the woods, the one by the burned house, the shadow in the Hendricks kitchen window. Finally, he asked the question I'd been dreading. You ever see him yourself? During any of these investigations? I wanted to say no. Wanted to tell him I'd have noticed, would have remembered. But the truth is, when you're working a scene, your attention's focused on evidence, on facts, on the things that might lead somewhere. You don't pay attention to bystanders, to neighbors watching from their windows, to the people who gather whenever something terrible happens in a small town. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe. Rourke left that evening, took copies of the photos with him. Said he'd run them past some experts, see if there was anything technical that might explain the recurring figure. We both knew he wouldn't find anything. Some things don't have explanations, just questions that eat at you until you wish you'd never asked them. Sunday night I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about all those cases, all those families who never got answers. Kept wondering if this figure, this watcher, was somehow connected to what happened to them. If he was a witness, or something worse. Monday morning I drove to Elm Street, parked in front of the house where Louise Hendricks died. New family lives there now, young couple with a baby. They've painted it yellow, put up a white picket fence, planted flowers in the front yard. Looks nothing like the crime scene I remember. But the kitchen window faces the same direction. Same view across the backyard to the line of trees where someone could stand and watch, unnoticed, for as long as they wanted. I sat in my truck for an hour, studying those trees. Telling myself I was being foolish, that retirement and too much time alone were making me see things that weren't there. But as the sun climbed higher and the shadows shifted, I could swear I caught glimpses of movement. Nothing definite, nothing I could point to and say there, that's what I saw. Just the sense that something was watching me the way I was watching the house. The same feeling I had when I drove out to where we found the Morrison boy. Woods look different now. They've cleared some of the underbrush for a nature trail. But the feeling was the same. That prickle on the back of your neck that tells you you're not alone, even when you can't see another soul. Tuesday I made a decision that probably wasn't smart, but I've made worse ones in my time. I drove to the county building, went down to the basement where they keep the old evidence. Told the clerk I needed to review some materials from cases I'd worked, told her I was writing my memoirs. Which wasn't entirely a lie. I'd been thinking about it. The evidence room smells like dust and old paper and something else, something stale and patient. Boxes stacked on metal shelves, each one labeled with case numbers and dates. I found what I was looking for in the Hendricks box. A manila envelope full of photographs they'd never used in court, never displayed at the trial that never happened. More angles of the kitchen. Close-ups of the blood spatter. Wide shots showing the whole room. And one I'd never seen before, taken from outside the house, showing the kitchen window from the backyard perspective. The figure wasn't blurry in this one. He was perfectly in focus, standing maybe 20 feet from the camera, close enough that you could see details. Tall, like I'd thought. Thin. Dark coat that looked old-fashioned, maybe from the 50s or 60s. And his face. I set the photograph down and walked outside. Sat on the courthouse steps until my hands stopped shaking, until I could breathe normally again. When I went back inside, the photograph was still there. Still showed what I thought I'd seen. The face was wrong. Not human wrong, not deformed or monstrous. Just wrong in a way that made your eyes want to slide away from it, made your brain refuse to process what it was seeing. Like looking at something that existed in too many dimensions at once, something that the flat surface of a photograph couldn't properly contain. But the eyes were clear enough. Dark, patient, ancient. The eyes of something that had been watching for a very long time. I drove home that night knowing I should let it go. Should put the photographs back, close the files, forget about the figure that appeared in decades of crime scenes. Should remember that I'm retired now, that whatever mysteries Millbrook County holds aren't my responsibility anymore. Instead, I pulled out every case file I had copies of, spread the photographs across my kitchen table, and started looking for him in earnest, not just in the obvious places but in every shadow, every reflection, every dark corner where a patient watcher might stand. He was in more of them than I'd realized. Sometimes just a glimpse, a shadow that didn't match the objects casting it, a reflection in a window that showed a figure where no one should have been standing. Sometimes clearer, like the photograph from the Brennan fire, where he stood across the street bold as daylight, watching the cleanup crews work. And in a few, he was close enough to the camera that you could see he was looking directly at whoever was taking the picture. Looking at them with those ancient, patient eyes that had seen everything and forgotten nothing. The breakthrough came Thursday morning, though I'm not sure breakthrough is the right word for something that just made everything worse. I was studying a photograph from the summer disappearance, the one taken during the search near the school, when I noticed something I'd missed before. In the background, barely visible among the trees, there were more figures. All with that same blurry quality, all watching the search team's work. I counted 7 of them. Started going back through all the photographs, looking not just for the tall figure in the dark coat but for others like him. Found them in most of the shots. Always in the background, always watching, always with that unsettling blur that made them hard to focus on. Sometimes 2 or 3, sometimes more. But the tall one, the first one I'd noticed, he was in every single photograph. Like he was the leader, or maybe just the most interested. The others seemed to fade in and out, appear and disappear, but he was constant. A fixture at every scene, every tragedy, every unexplained death or disappearance in Millbrook County's history. Friday I called Detective Rourke, told him what I'd found. He listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "How many cases total?" he asked finally. 17. Spanning 34 years. "And he's in all of them?" "Every one." Another long pause. Then, "Sheriff, I've been a cop for 26 years. Seen things that would curl your toes. But what you're describing, I know how it sounds. Do you? Because it sounds like you're telling me there's someone, or something, that's been present at every major crime in your county for over 3 decades. Someone who doesn't age, doesn't change, just watches. That's exactly what I'm telling you." He was quiet again. Finally, "Send me everything. Every photograph, every file. I want to run this past some people who know more about this kind of thing than I do." "What kind of thing?" "The kind we don't talk about in official reports." That was Friday. Today is Wednesday, and I haven't heard back from Rourke. Called his office twice, left messages. His secretary says he's been assigned to a special task force, won't be available for consultation on old cases. I've been thinking about that phrase, special task force. Wondering what kind of task force a 26-year veteran detective gets assigned to so suddenly, so quietly, without any mention in the local papers or police bulletins. Been thinking about other things too. Like how quiet the town's been lately. No sirens, no emergency calls, no disturbances of any kind. Even the usual Saturday night drunk and disorderlies have stopped. Like the whole place is holding its breath, waiting for something. And I've been thinking about the dreams I've been having. Same one every night since I found those photographs. I'm standing in my kitchen, looking out the window at the backyard, and he's there. The tall figure in the dark coat, standing just at the edge of the trees. Watching the house. Watching me. In the dream, I know he's been there all along. Not just since I found the photographs, but for years. Decades. Standing there every night, patient as stone, waiting for something. And I know, with the certainty that only comes in dreams, that he's been waiting for me to notice him. Been waiting for me to understand that he's not just a witness to Millbrook County's tragedies. He's their cause. Or maybe their purpose. Maybe there's no difference. The dream always ends the same way. I try to move away from the window, but I can't. Try to close my eyes, but they won't close. And he starts walking toward the house, slow and deliberate, his face becoming clearer with each step. And just before I can see what he really looks like, what he really is, I wake up. But last night, I didn't wake up. Last night, he reached the window, put his hand against the glass, fingers spread wide, and smiled. When I woke up this morning, really woke up, there was a handprint on my kitchen window. On the outside, where someone would have to be standing in my backyard to make it. It's still there. I've been staring at it for the past hour, trying to convince myself it's been there all along, that I just never noticed it before. But the glass was clean when I went to bed. I'm certain of that. Clean and clear and showing nothing but my own reflection. The handprint is larger than a normal human hand. Longer fingers, broader palm. And if you look at it from the right angle, in the right light, you can see that it's not quite the right shape. Like it was made by something that was almost human, but not quite. Something that had learned to approximate humanity but hadn't quite gotten the details right. I've been sitting here wondering what I should do. Call the sheriff's department, report a prowler? Tell them about the handprint, about the dreams, about the figure in the photographs? They'd think I was losing my mind. Maybe I am. Or maybe I should just pack up and leave. Sell the house, move somewhere far from Millbrook County, somewhere with different shadows and different watchers. But I don't think it would matter. I think once you've seen him, really seen him, distance doesn't mean much. I think he follows, patient as time, until you understand what he wants from you. The sun's going down now, and the shadows in my backyard are getting longer, deeper. I can see the line of trees where he stood in my dreams, where he's probably standing now, waiting for full dark to come calling again. I keep thinking about all those cases, all those families who never got answers, wondering if they saw him too, in their last moments. If Louise Hendricks looked up from her kitchen floor and saw that ancient face watching through the window. If the Morrison boy knew he was being followed through the woods. If the Brennan family woke up to find him standing in their hallway, smiling that smile I saw in my dream. The handprint on the window is glowing now, faintly luminescent in the gathering dusk. I can see my reflection in the glass, distorted by the strange shape pressed against it from the outside. And behind my reflection, getting clearer as the daylight fades, I can see him standing in the trees. He's not alone this time. The others are with him, maybe a dozen of them, all watching my house with those patient, ancient eyes. All waiting for something I'm beginning to understand. They're not just witnesses to Millbrook County's tragedies. They're collectors. And I've spent the last week cataloging their collection, identifying their work, understanding their purpose. I've seen what they are, really seen them, and that makes me part of it now. Part of their pattern. The phone's been ringing for the past 10 minutes, but I'm not going to answer it. I know who it is, Detective Rourke, or someone like him, someone who's been tasked with cleaning up loose ends like retired sheriffs who ask too many questions and see too much. They'll find my body tomorrow, probably. Heart attack, most likely, or maybe a fall down the basement stairs. Something natural, something that won't raise questions. And there'll be a crime scene photographer taking pictures of my kitchen, my backyard, my house where I spent 43 years trying to keep the darkness at bay. And in the background of those photographs, if you know where to look, if you have the patience to study the shadows and the spaces between, he'll be there. Watching, collecting, adding my case to his vast, patient catalog of human tragedy. The difference is, this time I know he's coming. This time I can see him walking across my backyard, his footsteps making no sound on the fallen leaves. This time I can see his face clearly, and it's worse than I imagined. Not because it's monstrous, but because it's beautiful. Ancient and terrible and beautiful, like something carved from shadow and starlight. He's at the window now, pressing his other hand against the glass beside the first one. The handprints are glowing brighter, and I can feel heat radiating through the glass, can smell something like copper and old roses filling my kitchen. I should be afraid. Any reasonable person would be afraid. But all I feel is tired. Tired of carrying secrets. Tired of questions without answers. Tired of being the one who has to watch and remember, and try to make sense of things that were never meant to make sense. He's tapping on the glass now, soft and rhythmic, like he's keeping time to some music only he can hear. And I realize I can hear it too, faintly, a melody that sounds like wind through empty houses and rain on fresh graves. The glass is starting to crack. I want to tell whoever finds this that I'm sorry. Sorry for all the cases I couldn't solve, all the families I couldn't help, all the questions I couldn't answer. But mostly I'm sorry for what's coming next. Because I understand now that my retirement wasn't an ending, it was preparation. All those years of watching and remembering and cataloging tragedy were training for this moment, when I join the watchers in the shadows, when I become one of them. The windows shattering now, glass falling like frozen tears onto my kitchen floor. And he's stepping through, tall and graceful and impossibly old, bringing the smell of copper and roses and things that died a long time ago. He's smiling, and his voice when he speaks sounds like wind through empty places, like the last breath of dying things. Sheriff, he says, and the word holds 43 years of weight, 43 years of secrets and sorrows and unanswered questions. We've been waiting for you. I should run. Should fight. Should do something other than sit here listening to that terrible, beautiful music growing louder, feeling the cold radiating from his ancient skin as he reaches for me with fingers too long and too sharp to be human. But I don't. Because I finally understand what he is, what they all are. They're not evil, not in any way we'd recognize. They're just patient. Eternal. Collectors of human tragedy, catalogers of sorrow, witnesses to the brief, bright sparks of life that flicker and die in the darkness. And they need help with their collection. Need someone who understands the weight of secrets, the burden of watching, the price of remembering things others want to forget. Someone like me. The last thing I see before the darkness takes me is my reflection in his eyes, not as I am now, but as I'm becoming. Tall and thin and patient, with shadows where my face should be and eyes that have seen too much to ever look away. Tomorrow they'll find my house empty, windows broken, no sign of struggle or violence. Just another unsolved case from Millbrook County's files, another mystery for some future sheriff to puzzle over. But I'll be watching from the shadows when they take their photographs. Standing just at the edge of the frame, blurry and indistinct, patient as stone. Waiting for the next tragedy to witness. The next story to collect. The next keeper of secrets to join our eternal watch. Because that's what we do. That's what we've always done. We watch. We remember. We wait. And sometimes, when someone gets too close to understanding what we are, we invite them to join us. The collection is always growing. The watchers are always patient. And somewhere in Millbrook County tonight, in the shadows between streetlights and the spaces behind windows, we are standing guard over secrets that should never be spoken aloud. Forever. Yesterday's gone. Not in memory, not on tape, not in time itself. That's what I told myself when I first opened my eyes that Tuesday morning in October, 37 years ago. but telling yourself something and believing it are two different animals entirely. And I've learned that the hard way more times than I care to count. My name doesn't matter much now. Most folks who knew it are dead or moved away. But I was sheriff of Millbrook County for 28 years, and in all that time, I never saw anything that shook me quite like what happened that autumn. The thing about small towns is they have their own rhythm, their own heartbeat. You get to know it after a while, the way a doctor knows the sound of a healthy pulse. Millbrook had always been a quiet place, the kind of town where the biggest excitement was usually Mrs. Henderson's cat getting stuck in Old Man Weber's elm tree, or teenagers drinking beer behind the defunct grain elevator. Population 812, give or take whoever was visiting relatives or had moved away for work. But that Tuesday morning, something was off. Not wrong, exactly, at least not at first, just different. Like listening to a familiar song played in a different key. I'd been sheriff for 15 years by then, long enough to know when something didn't sit right. The air felt too still, too thick. Even for October, when the leaves should have been turning and falling, everything seemed suspended somehow. Frozen in amber. My office was in the old courthouse building on Main Street, a brick structure that had been standing since 1889 and looked every year of it. The wooden floors creaked with stories, and the radiator clanged like an old chain dragging across stone. That morning, though, even those familiar sounds seemed muted, as if they were coming from somewhere far away. The first sign of trouble came around 9:30. Betty Morse, who ran the diner down the street, came stumbling through my door with a look I'd never seen on her face before. Betty was one of those women who could remember every order, every customer, every conversation that happened in her establishment. She had a mind like a steel trap and a disposition to match. But that morning, Betty looked lost. "Sheriff," she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Something's not right." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. Betty was pale, which wasn't unusual. She spent most of her time indoors under fluorescent lights. But there was something else. Her eyes had a glassy quality, like she was looking through me instead of at me. "What's the trouble, Betty?" She wrung her hands, twisting her apron between her fingers. "I can't. I opened the diner this morning, same as always. Made coffee, started the griddle, got everything ready for the breakfast rush. But I can't remember closing yesterday. Maybe you were tired. Long day. No, you don't understand." Her voice cracked slightly. "I don't remember anything about yesterday. Not serving customers, not cooking, not cleaning up. Nothing. It's like the day never happened." I dealt with my share of odd complaints over the years. Farmers convinced their neighbors were stealing chickens, elderly folks certain that teenagers were moving their lawn ornaments around just to confuse them. But Betty Morse wasn't the type to imagine things, and she sure wasn't the type to come to the sheriff's office unless something was genuinely wrong. "When's the last thing you do remember?" I asked. She thought for a long moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Sunday evening. I remember locking up the diner Sunday night, going home, watching the news. Then, nothing until I woke up this morning." "What about Monday?" "That's what I'm trying to tell you, Sheriff. Monday's gone." After Betty left, I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled in my stomach like bad coffee. Maybe she was having some kind of breakdown. People get stressed, they forget things. It happens. But something nagged at me, a persistent itch I couldn't quite scratch. I decided to take a walk around town, just to check on things. It was something I did regularly anyway, part of the job, part of keeping connected to the community I served. Millbrook wasn't big enough to require much patrolling, but showing your face around town was important. Let people know you were there, available, paying attention. The first thing I noticed was how quiet the streets were. Not unusual for a Tuesday morning, necessarily, but there was something different about the quality of the silence. It felt heavy, expectant, like the moment before a thunderstorm when all the birds stop singing and the air goes still. I stopped by Henderson's grocery store, the little bell above the door chiming as I entered. Mrs. Henderson was behind the counter, staring at an order pad with a confused expression. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson." She looked up, startled. "Oh, Sheriff. I didn't hear you come in. Everything all right?" She held up the pad, shaking her head. "I keep my orders written down, you know. Every delivery, every supplier. Been doing it the same way for 20 years. But look at this." She showed me the pad. The page that should have contained Monday's entries was blank. Not crossed out, not erased, just empty, as if nothing had happened that day at all. "Maybe you forgot to write anything down," I suggested, though even as I said it, I knew how unlikely that was. Mrs. Henderson was methodical to a fault. That's what I thought at first. But then I checked my register tape. She opened the cash drawer and pulled out a small roll of paper. "Look here. Saturday's receipts, Sunday's receipts, then nothing until this morning. It's like Monday never existed." The uneasy feeling in my stomach grew stronger. Two people with the same impossible story wasn't a coincidence. I spent the next hour visiting businesses around town, and everywhere I went, the story was the same. Empty journal pages, blank security footage, missing receipts. It was as if the entire town had experienced some kind of collective amnesia, but only for that one specific day. By noon, my office was crowded with concerned citizens, all asking the same questions, all describing the same impossible situation. Old Mr. Weber, who'd kept a detailed diary for 40 years, showed me the empty page where Monday should have been. The banker, a nervous man named Phillips, brought ledger books that skipped from Sunday to Tuesday with no explanation. But it was young Tommy Brennan who brought me the thing that made my blood run cold. Tommy worked at the gas station on the edge of town, a kid maybe 19 or 20 with more enthusiasm than sense. He came into my office carrying a small box, his face pale and his hands shaking slightly. "Sheriff, you need to see this." He set the box on my desk and opened it. Inside were maybe 24 watches and clocks, wristwatches, alarm clocks, a couple of pocket watches that looked like they'd been in families for generations. "Found these in the back room at the station," Tommy said. "Every single one stopped at the same time." I picked up one of the watches, a simple digital model. The display read 11:47 p.m. I checked another, an old wind-up alarm clock. Its hands were frozen at the same position. "When did you find these?" "This morning, when I came in to open up. They were just sitting there in a cardboard box, like someone had collected them." Tommy ran a hand through his hair. "Thing is, Sheriff, I recognize most of these. That pocket watch there belongs to Mr. Garrett. That digital one is Mrs. Murphy's, she always wears it to church. But nobody remembers bringing them to the station." I stared at the collection of timepieces, all frozen at the same moment. 11:47 p.m. on what should have been Monday night. "Tommy, I need you to think carefully. Is there anything else unusual you noticed? Anything at all?" He was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, actually. The security camera at the station, it runs all the time, records everything. But when I checked the tape this morning, Monday's completely blank. Not black, not static. Just empty." The rest of that day passed in a blur of confused residents and impossible evidence. Everyone in town had lost the same 24 hours. Security cameras throughout Millbrook showed normal activity on Sunday evening, then nothing until Tuesday morning. Personal journals, appointment books, even children's homework assignments, all blank for Monday. But the most disturbing part wasn't what was missing. It was what was there instead. Dr. Hartley, who ran the small medical clinic on Pine Street, came to see me around 4 o'clock. He was a quiet man, the kind of person who chose his words carefully and didn't speak unless he had something important to say. "Sheriff, I need to show you something," he said, closing my office door behind him. "Something I found in my appointment book." He opened a leather-bound planner to Monday's page. Where there should have been appointment times and patient names, there was instead a single line of text written in his own handwriting. "They came at sunset. We welcomed them." "I don't remember writing this," Dr. Hartley said. "I've never seen these words before in my life. But that's definitely my handwriting." A chill ran down my spine. "Anyone else have something like this?" "That's why I'm here. I've been talking to people around town, and quite a few have found similar messages. Always in their own handwriting, always something they don't remember writing." Over the next hour, more people came forward with similar discoveries. Sarah Mitchell, the librarian, found a note in her journal. The stars were different that night. Old Joe Garrett had written in his notebook, "Time bent backward," and we followed. Margaret Foster, who taught second grade at the elementary school, showed me a page where she'd apparently written the same phrase over and over. "We are the hollow men. We are the stuffed men." Each person swore they had never seen the words before, yet the handwriting was unmistakably their own. As evening approached, I found myself sitting alone in my office, staring at the collection of stopped clocks Tommy had brought me. The rational part of my mind kept trying to find logical explanations. Mass hysteria, maybe? Some kind of gas leak that had affected the whole town's memory. Food poisoning. A shared delusion brought on by stress or fear. But the evidence was too consistent, too specific. An entire day had simply vanished from existence, leaving behind only cryptic messages and frozen timepieces. I decided to drive home and check my own house, see if I could find any clues about what had happened to my missing Monday. My place was a small ranch house about 2 miles outside town, set back from the road in a grove of oak trees that had been there since before the town was founded. The house felt wrong the moment I walked in. Not damaged or disturbed, but somehow altered in ways I couldn't quite identify. The air smelled different, not bad, exactly, but unfamiliar. Like ozone before a storm, or the metallic taste you get in your mouth before lightning strikes. I went through each room methodically, looking for anything out of place. In my bedroom, I found my own appointment calendar open to Monday's page. Like the others, it contained a message in my own handwriting. We stood in the field and watched them dance. I stared at the words for a long time, trying to remember writing them, trying to remember what they might mean. Nothing came. It was like looking at a photograph of strangers and being told they were your family. But it was in my kitchen that I found the thing that still gives me nightmares. On the table, arranged in a perfect circle, were 13 place settings. Plates, cups, silverware, napkins, all laid out as if for a dinner party. The plates were clean but showed signs of recent use, the faintest residue of food around the edges. The cups contained a few drops of some dark liquid I couldn't identify. I lived alone. Had lived alone for 3 years since my wife passed. I never entertained, rarely had visitors. Yet someone, or something, had used my kitchen for a gathering I couldn't remember. I picked up one of the cups and sniffed the remaining liquid. It had a sweet, cloying smell that made my stomach turn. Not quite wine, not quite blood, but something in between. Something that shouldn't exist. That's when I noticed the chairs. There were 13 of them arranged around the table, but only 12 were from my kitchen. The 13th was different, older, made of a dark wood I didn't recognize, with strange symbols carved into the backrest. It didn't belong in my house. I had never seen it before in my life. I sat down heavily in one of my own chairs, trying to process what I was seeing. Someone had been in my house. Multiple someones, based on the place settings. They had eaten here, drunk here, used furniture that didn't belong to me. And I had no memory of any of it. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky the color of old blood. The oak trees around my house seemed to lean in closer, their branches reaching toward the windows like gnarled fingers. In the growing darkness, I thought I could hear something, a low humming sound, barely audible, like voices singing a song in a language I didn't understand. I got up and went to the window, pressing my face against the glass. The field behind my house stretched away into the darkness, empty and still. But as I watched, I could swear I saw shapes moving in the distance, tall, thin figures that seemed to glide rather than walk. The humming grew louder. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering in my chest. Whatever had happened on that missing Monday, I was beginning to understand that some knowledge was too dangerous to recover. Some memories were lost for good reason. But as I stood there in my violated kitchen, surrounded by evidence of a gathering I couldn't remember, I realized that forgetting might not be enough. Because even though the day was gone from our memories, even though the recordings were blank and the journals empty, something had been left behind. Something that was still here, still watching, still waiting. I never did figure out exactly what happened that Monday in Millbrook. The investigation I launched the next day went nowhere. How do you investigate something that officially never occurred? The FBI wasn't interested in a town full of people with memory problems. The state police suggested we all see a doctor. But over the years that followed, things changed in Millbrook. Subtle things at first. People started avoiding the field behind my house, though they couldn't say why. Children refused to play near the oak grove, claiming they could hear whispers in the wind. The suicide rate increased, though never dramatically enough to draw attention from outside authorities. And every year, on the anniversary of that missing Monday, the same thing happened. People would wake up with gaps in their memory, though never as complete as that first time. Just a few hours here and there, enough to know that something was wrong but not enough to understand what. The stop clocks and watches became a permanent fixture in my office. No one ever claimed them, and they never started working again. They remained frozen at 11:47 p.m., marking the exact moment when time had hiccuped. I retired 5 years ago and moved away from Millbrook, but I still keep in touch with a few people there. They tell me the town is dying slowly, families moving away without explanation, businesses closing, young people leaving for college and never coming back. The population is down to maybe 300 now, mostly elderly folks too set in their ways to leave. But every October, I get a call from whoever's serving as sheriff now. They never last long in that job anymore, asking me about that missing Monday. Because it still happens, you see. Every year, without fail, the town loses a day. Sometimes it's just a few hours, sometimes the better part of a week. But it always happens, and it's always the same: empty recordings, blank pages, stopped clocks. And always, those cryptic messages in people's own handwriting, describing things they can't remember but somehow experienced. The current sheriff is a young woman named Rodriguez. She called me last month, her voice tight with fear and confusion. "Sheriff," she said, "they all still call me that, even though I've been retired for years. It happened again. But this time, it was different." "How different?" "This time, we found photographs." She emailed them to me an hour later. Dozens of pictures, taken all around town during the missing hours. In each one, you could see the residents of Millbrook engaged in some kind of ceremony. They were standing in circles, holding hands, their faces turned up toward the sky. Their eyes were closed, their mouths open as if they were singing. But the most disturbing part wasn't the people in the photographs. It was what was standing among them, tall, and possibly thin figures with too many joints and faces that seemed to shift and blur even in still images. The beings appeared to be leading the ceremony, conducting it like some kind of orchestra. In the final photograph, taken in the field behind my old house, all the townspeople were kneeling around the ancient oak trees. The strange figures towered over them, their arms raised toward a sky that showed stars in patterns I had never seen before. And in the center of it all, barely visible in the shadows, was that 13th chair from my kitchen, the one made of dark wood with symbols carved into the backrest. "What do you think it means?" Rodriguez asked when she called me back. I stared at the photographs spread across my desk, feeling the same cold dread I'd experienced all those years ago. "I think it means they're not done with Millbrook yet. Whatever took that first Monday, whatever's been taking pieces of time from your town ever since." I paused, studying the inhuman figures in the photographs. "I think they've been preparing for something. All these years, they've been getting ready." "Ready for what?" I didn't answer immediately. In the photograph, I could see faces I recognized, people who had been children when I was sheriff, now grown and participating in ceremonies they would never remember. Generation after generation, drawn into something they couldn't understand or resist. "I think they're almost finished," I finally said. "Whatever they came to Millbrook to do, I think they're nearly done." Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What happens when they finish?" I looked at the final photograph again, at the impossible stars in the alien sky, at the residents of Millbrook kneeling in worship of things that shouldn't exist. "I think Millbrook disappears entirely," I said. "Not just from memory this time. From everything. From existence itself." She hung up after that, and I haven't heard from her since. But I've been watching the news, checking online records, looking for any mention of Millbrook County. As of last week, I can't find any official record of the town's existence. No census data, no county records, no historical documents. It's as if Millbrook never existed at all. But I remember. I remember the taste of fear in my mouth that Tuesday morning 37 years ago. I remember the collection of stopped clocks, all frozen at 11:47 p.m. I remember the place settings in my kitchen and the chair that didn't belong. Most of all, I remember the message I found in my own handwriting, the words I never recalled writing. We stood in the field and watched them dance. Sometimes, late at night, I think I can still see them dancing. Tall figures moving in patterns that hurt to watch, conducting ceremonies that bend time itself. And I wonder if Millbrook was the first, or if there are other small towns out there, other communities slowly being prepared for something beyond human understanding. I wonder if they're coming for us all, one missing day at a time. Yesterday's gone. Not in memory, not on tape, not in time itself. And tomorrow might be gone too, before we even know it's here. End of recording. I followed a tail light for 5 hours before I realized it was mine. Now, I know how that sounds. Like maybe the old sheriff's finally lost his marbles, or spent too many years breathing in the dust of this forgotten corner of nowhere. But I'm telling you this because it happened, and because 37 years of wearing this badge taught me that the most impossible things are often the most true. This was back in '89, when they finished that stretch of Route 47 that cuts around the east side of town. The state boys had been working on it for near 2 years, blasting through Miller's Ridge and laying asphalt where nothing but deer trails and old logging roads used to wind. The town council was pleased as punch about it, figured it would bring more traffic through, Maybe help the local businesses that were already starting to fold up like lawn chairs at the end of summer. I remember the day they removed the construction barriers. October 3rd, because that's when Mrs. Henley called in about her tabby cat going missing, and I was driving past the new road on my way to help her search. The asphalt looked too black against the autumn leaves, like a wound that hadn't quite healed right. The yellow lines were so fresh they seemed to glow in the late afternoon sun, and something about it made my teeth ache the way they do before a storm. But it wasn't the road itself that bothered me at first. It was the silence. See, Miller's Ridge had always been loud with birds, crows mostly, but also the hawks that nested in the tall pines. Even in October, you'd hear them calling across the valley. But after they cut that road through, the birds went quiet. Not gone, mind you. You could still see them perched in the trees, black shapes against the orange and gold leaves. They just stopped making noise, like someone had reached up and turned off their sound. The first complaint came in 3 days after the road opened. Tommy Breslin, who ran the garage on the south end of town, said a customer had come in claiming he'd been driving in circles for hours, burning through half a tank of gas trying to get to the interstate. Tommy figured the man was just confused. City folks sometimes got turned around on our winding country roads. But then it happened again. And again. By the end of October, I had 17 separate reports of people getting lost on the new stretch of 47. They all told the same story. They'd turn onto the road thinking it would take them around town and connect back to the main highway. But instead they'd find themselves driving the same curves over and over, passing the same landmarks, watching their gas gauges drop while the sun moved across the sky in ways that didn't make sense. I figured it was just poor signage. The state had put up markers, but maybe they weren't clear enough. So I drove out there myself on November 2nd, a Tuesday that dawned gray and stayed that way. The temperature had dropped overnight, and my breath came out in small puffs as I walked the perimeter of the new section, checking for missing signs or confusing intersections. The road was about 12 miles long, designed to loop around the eastern hills and reconnect with Route 47 about 5 miles north of town. Simple enough. There were only 2 turns, one about 4 miles in where you curved around the base of Dead Men's Bluff, and another about 8 miles later where the road bent back toward the main highway. Nothing complicated about it. But standing there in the gray morning light, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. The road markers were there, all right, but they were wrong. The mile markers, which should have read 1, 2, 3, and so on, were all reading the same number, 6. Every single one of them. 6 miles, over and over, like someone had gotten lazy or made a clerical error. I made a note to call the state transportation office, then got back in my cruiser to drive the route myself. That's when I saw the tail light. It was about a quarter mile ahead of me, just a single red dot moving at a steady pace around the curve near Dead Man's Bluff. I couldn't make out what kind of vehicle it was. The distance and the gray light made it hard to see, but I followed it, thinking maybe I could catch up and ask the driver if they'd experienced any problems with the road. But I never caught up. No matter how fast I drove, that red light stayed the same distance ahead of me. When I slowed down, it slowed down. When I sped up, it sped up. For a while, I thought it was just someone playing games. But after an hour of this cat and mouse routine, I started paying attention to the landscape around me. I was passing the same tree 3 times. A big oak with a split trunk that I'd noticed because it looked like a giant's wishbone. Then the same rusted mailbox, standing alone by the roadside with no house in sight. Then the same stretch of guardrail where someone had scraped off the paint in a long silver scar. The same landmarks, over and over, while that red light stayed just out of reach ahead of me. After 2 hours, I pulled over and got out of the car. The silence was complete. No birds, no wind, no distant traffic. Even my own footsteps seemed muffled, like the asphalt was swallowing the sound. I checked my watch, 11:30 a.m. I'd started this drive at 9:15, so that was about right. But when I looked at the sun, it was in the wrong place. Too low, too far to the west, like it was late afternoon instead of mid-morning. I got back in the cruiser and kept driving, telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe I'd misread my watch. Maybe the overcast sky was playing tricks with the light. But that red tail light was still there, still moving at exactly my speed, and I was starting to get the unsettling feeling that I was chasing my own shadow. That's when I noticed the radio. Static had been building for the past hour, gradually drowning out the usual chatter from dispatch. But now, underneath the white noise, I could hear something else. A voice, too faint to make out the words, but unmistakably human. It sounded like someone calling for help from a great distance, the way voices carry across water on a still night. I tried to adjust the frequency, but the voice just faded into the static. Every few minutes it would come back, a little clearer, a little more desperate. By the third hour, I could make out some of the words. "Can anyone hear me?" And, "I've been driving for days." And once, very clearly, "Please God, I just want to go home." I grabbed my radio and tried to respond, but my own voice just fed back into static. It was like shouting into a well and hearing only echoes. By the fourth hour, I was starting to panic. I'd passed that split oak tree so many times I could have counted the branches. The gas gauge was sitting just above a quarter tank, which should have been impossible. I'd started with a full tank, and even with all this driving, I couldn't have burned through that much fuel. Time wasn't behaving right either. My watch said 1:45 p.m., but the light outside was getting dimmer instead of brighter, and that wrongness in the sky was making my head pound. The radio voice was getting clearer, too. I could make out full sentences now. I tried to turn around, but every road leads back to the same place. And my wife is going to think I'm dead. She's probably called the police by now. And worst of all, I can see a car behind me, but it never gets any closer. That's when it hit me. The red tail light I'd been following for 4 hours wasn't attached to another car. It was my own reflection, somehow projected ahead of me on this impossible loop of road. And the voice on the radio wasn't some other lost driver. It was me. I pulled over again, hands shaking as I turned off the engine. The silence rushed in like water, and I sat there trying to make sense of what was happening. The road curved ahead of me, disappearing around Dead Man's Bluff, but I knew that if I kept driving, I'd just end up back here again. And again. And again. I thought about getting out and walking, but something about the stillness of the air made me reluctant to leave the cruiser. The silence wasn't natural. It was too complete, too heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Even the trees seemed wrong, their branches motionless despite the gray clouds moving overhead. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, just a trace of something sweet and rotten drifting through the car's ventilation system. But it got stronger the longer I sat there, until it filled my nose and throat with the stench of decay. Not roadkill or garbage, but something deeper. Something that had been rotting for a very long time. I started the engine and drove on, hoping to leave the smell behind, but it followed me. The red tail light was still there too, still keeping its distance, and the voice on the radio was getting more frantic. Day 3 now, I think. Hard to tell because the sun doesn't move right. Food's running low. Water's running low. Jesus Christ, somebody help me. Day 3. But I'd only been on this road for 4 hours. I kept driving, and the landscape started to change in subtle ways. The trees were still oak and pine, but their trunks were too straight, their branches too regular, like someone had planted them in rows. The guardrail was still there, but it extended further than it should have, running alongside the road in an unbroken line that disappeared into the distance. And the pavement itself was getting smoother, newer looking, as if it was rebuilding itself as I drove. By the 5th hour, I'd stopped looking at my watch altogether. Time had become meaningless. The gray light outside never changed, never got brighter or darker, just maintained that flat, dead quality that made everything look like an overexposed photograph. The voice on the radio had stopped talking and was just breathing now, long, ragged gasps that made my skin crawl. And then I saw it. Just for a moment, in my peripheral vision, I caught sight of something in the trees beside the road. A structure of some kind, too regular to be natural. I slowed down, trying to get a better look, but it was gone. Or maybe it had never been there at all. But the feeling lingered. The sense that something was watching me from the woods, something that had been waiting in the spaces between the trees for a very long time. Something that had been hungry. The radio crackled, and a new voice came through the static. Not mine this time, but someone else's. A woman crying, "Tommy, if you can hear this, I'm somewhere on the new road. I've been trying to get home for 2 days. The car's almost out of gas. I can see the road behind me, but there's nobody there. Nobody at all." Then another voice, older, cracked with exhaustion. "This is Jim Bradley from up on Elm Street. I took the new bypass this morning to avoid the construction on Main. That was 3 days ago. My family must think I'm dead. The road just keeps going and going." More voices joined in, overlapping, creating a chorus of the lost. A teenager who'd been late for school, an elderly man who'd gotten confused trying to visit his sister, a young mother who'd been driving to the grocery store and never made it home. All of them trapped on this loop of road, driving in circles while their lives went on without them. I realized then that I wasn't the first person to get caught. The road had been collecting drivers like a spider collecting flies, and we were all here together, separated by time but connected by the same impossible geometry that kept us moving in circles. The red tail light ahead of me flickered and went out. I slowed down, peering through the windshield, but there was nothing there. Just empty road stretching ahead, curving around Dead Man's Bluff for what felt like the 1000th time. But as I rounded the curve, I saw something that made my blood freeze. There, parked on the shoulder exactly where I'd pulled over hours earlier, was my own cruiser. Empty. The driver's door hanging open like a discarded shell. I was looking at myself from the outside, watching my own ghost drive the same route over and over while my real body sat somewhere else, maybe still sitting in that empty car, maybe long gone. The radio voices were getting louder now, more desperate, talking over each other in a chaos of fear and loneliness. And underneath it all, I could hear something else. A low humming sound, like machinery running deep underground. The kind of sound you feel in your bones rather than hear with your ears. I kept driving, because what else could I do? The road stretched ahead of me, smooth and black and endless, and I followed it around the curve, past the split oak tree, past the rusted mailbox, past the scarred guardrail. The same landmarks, over and over, like prayer beads on a rosary string. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear my own voice on the radio, calling for help that would never come. And I realized that I would be driving this road forever, adding my voice to the chorus of the lost. While somewhere back in town, people would start to wonder where Sheriff Morrison had gone. They'd find my cruiser eventually, parked and empty on the shoulder of the new bypass, and they'd assume I'd had some kind of breakdown, walked off into the woods and gotten lost. They'd never think to look for me on the road itself, driving in circles through the gray light, chasing my own tail light through eternity. The construction crews who built this road had dug too deep, I think. Cut through something that should have been left alone. Miller's Ridge had been quiet for good reason. The birds knew to stay away from whatever was sleeping beneath the earth. But we'd disturb it with our blasting and our bulldozers, and now it was awake and hungry. The road feeds on travelers, on movement, on the simple human need to get from one place to another. It takes that need and perverts it, turns it into an endless loop of false hope and growing despair. And once you're caught, you become part of the road itself, another voice in the static, another set of headlights reflected in the dark. I've been driving for what feels like years now, though the gray light outside never changes. My gas gauge still reads a quarter tank, and my watch still shows the same time it did when I first realized I was trapped. Time has no meaning here, and distance is just an illusion. Sometimes I see other cars on the road now, vague shapes in my mirrors, tail lights in the distance ahead. Other drivers who took the new bypass and never made it home. We're all here together, circling the same loop, listening to each other's voices on the radio as we slowly go mad with the repetition. And sometimes, late at night when the static clears, I can hear the road itself breathing. A low, satisfied sound, like something that has fed well and is content to wait for the next meal. They should have left Miller's Ridge alone. Some places are quiet for good reason, and some hungers are better left unfed. But we built our road anyway, confident in our machinery and our progress, never thinking that we might be creating something worse than we destroyed. Now the road is part of the town, and the town is part of the road, and travelers who think they're taking a shortcut around our little corner of nowhere find themselves taking a much longer journey than they ever imagined. If you ever find yourself driving through this part of the country, and you see a sign for the Route 47 bypass around the east side of town, keep driving. Take the long way. Stay on the main road, even if there's construction, even if it adds an hour to your trip. Because some shortcuts don't lead where you think they're going. And once you're on our road, you become part of it forever. Another voice in the static, another driver chasing their own tail light through the endless gray. I followed a tail light for 5 hours before I realized it was mine. And I'm still following it. The road never ends, but it always leads back to the same place, here, where the hunger waits, patient and eternal, beneath the smooth, black asphalt of progress. Sometimes I wonder if anyone in town notices that cars occasionally disappear on the new bypass. If they've figured out that the road takes more than it gives. But I suspect they just assume it's driver error, people getting confused in the dark, or taking the wrong turn somewhere along the way. They'll never admit that the road itself is wrong, that some places resist being paved over, and when you force them to submit, they find ways to feed on what's brought to them. The new bypass is the town's pride and joy now, bringing in revenue from increased traffic flow. What they don't realize is that the traffic never quite flows the way it should. Cars enter the loop, but they don't all leave it. Some of us stay, trapped in the space between departure and arrival, forever traveling but never reaching our destination. And the road grows stronger with each new voice added to its collection, each new driver who discovers too late that the shortcut they chose leads somewhere they never intended to go. The mile markers still all read 6, even after all these years. 6 miles to nowhere, 6 miles from everywhere, 6 miles of road that exists outside the normal flow of time and space. The state never fixed that error, because they can't see it. To them, the markers probably read correctly. The wrongness only shows itself to those who are already caught. But I know the truth now, sitting here in my cruiser that runs on phantom fuel, following my own tail light through the endless gray. I know that some roads don't just connect places, they consume them. And once you're part of the road, you never stop driving. You just keep moving forward, chasing that red light ahead of you, listening to the voices of the lost crackling through the radio static, waiting for the next driver to join the endless procession of the damned. The road is patient. It can wait. It has all the time in the world. Every name in that book disappears within 72 hours. And the last one it wrote was mine. I've been sheriff of Millbrook for 37 years, and in all that time, I've seen things that would make most folks pack up and leave town before sunset. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what started happening in the summer of '98. I should have retired years before that. Should have handed in my badge and moved somewhere warm, somewhere the air doesn't taste like old secrets, and the trees don't whisper things you'd rather not hear. But I stayed. And because I stayed, I witnessed something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Something that changed the way I look at every book, every piece of paper, every scrap of writing that crosses my desk. It began on a Tuesday morning in July. The kind of day where the heat sits on you like a wet wool blanket and even the flies move slow. I was going through some old files in the station basement, reorganizing evidence boxes from cases that went back to the 70s. Millbrook's not a big place. Population hovers around 800, give or take whoever's left town or died in any given month. We don't get much serious crime, mostly drunk and disorderlies, domestic disputes, the occasional break-in. The kind of problems that make you feel useful without keeping you awake at night. I was down there in that musty basement, surrounded by cardboard boxes that smelled like old cigarettes and disappointment, when I found it. Wedged between a box of photographs from a 1979 arson case and a plastic bag full of rusted evidence tags, there was this ledger. Thick black binding, maybe 10 inches tall, 8 inches wide. The leather was cracked but not brittle, like it had been well cared for and then forgotten. I'd never seen it before. And after 4 decades in law enforcement, most of it spent in this same building, I knew every piece of paper, every file, every coffee-stained report that had ever crossed through our doors. This ledger didn't belong. I opened it to the first page. The paper was cream-colored, heavy stock, the kind they don't make anymore. At the top, written in faded blue ink in careful cursive, were the words, Registry of Departures Millbrook Township EST 1847. Below that, columns of names, dates, and what looked like brief notations. Most of the entries were old, really old. Names I didn't recognize, dates going back to the 1800s. But what caught my attention were the entries at the bottom of the page. Fresh ink. Recent dates. And names I knew. Margaret Holloway, July 3, 1998, sudden departure, no forwarding address. Thomas Brennan, June 28, 1998, gone without trace. Susan Chin, June 15, 1998, vanished, belongings left behind. My stomach dropped. Those were missing persons cases from the past month. 3 people who had simply disappeared. Margaret Holloway was a retired school teacher who lived alone on Elm Street. Her neighbor called us when her newspapers started piling up and her cat was crying on the porch. We found her house exactly as she'd left it, coffee cups still half filled on the kitchen table, television on, purse and keys by the door. Like she'd stepped out for a moment and never came back. Thomas Brennan owned the hardware store downtown. One morning he just didn't open up. His truck was still in the parking lot, keys in the ignition, cash register untouched. We put out alerts, contacted relatives in other states, ran his credit cards. Nothing. No activity, no sightings, no trace. Susan Chin was a nurse at the county hospital. She'd moved to Millbrook just 6 months before she vanished. Kept to herself, worked double shifts, sent money to family back in California. Her landlord found her apartment pristine, bed made, dishes washed, everything in its place. Except Susan was gone. 3 separate cases, 3 separate investigations. No connections between the victims that we could find. No obvious motives, no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. Just 3 people who existed one day and didn't the next. And here they were, written in a ledger that shouldn't have existed, with details we never released to the public. I flipped through more pages. The entries went back decades. Hundreds of names, maybe thousands. Some had brief notations. Called away by circumstance, answered the summons, heeded the invitation. Others just had dates and the simple word, gone. The handwriting changed throughout the years. Dozens of different hands had contributed to this record. But the format remained consistent, as if each new writer was following some established protocol. Some entries were elaborate, almost poetic. Others were stark, clinical. All of them suggested that these disappearances weren't random. They were expected, recorded, part of some larger pattern that had been going on for over a century. I spent the rest of that day going through the ledger, cross-referencing names with old case files, newspaper archives, town records. Every name I could verify matched a real person who had vanished from Millbrook. Not just recent cases, disappearances going back generations. People whose stories had become local legends, cautionary tales parents told their children about strangers and staying close to home. By evening, I had a list of over 200 confirmed matches. 200 people who had vanished from our small town over the course of 150 years. All meticulously recorded in a book that nobody in the department had ever seen before. I locked the ledger in my desk that night and went home to my empty house on Maple Street. My wife Helen had passed 3 years prior, and since then, the silence felt different, not peaceful, but expectant. Like the house was waiting for something. That night, the feeling was stronger than usual. I sat in my kitchen, nursing a glass of bourbon and staring out at the street, wondering how many of the dark windows I could see had once belonged to people whose names were written in that book. The next morning, I came in early. Before I'd even had my first cup of coffee, I opened the desk drawer and pulled out the ledger. My hands were shaking, from too much bourbon the night before, I told myself, though I knew it was something else. I opened to the last page with entries and nearly dropped the book. There was a new name. Fresh ink, still slightly wet. Eleanor Vasquez, July 15, 1998, departed in the pre-dawn hours. Eleanor Vasquez worked the night shift at the diner on Route 9. I'd seen her there just 2 days ago when I stopped for coffee after a late call. Friendly woman, probably in her 40s, been in Millbrook for about 2 years. She moved here from Phoenix, said she was looking for somewhere quiet to start over after a divorce. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the diner. The morning shift cook, Danny, was there setting up for breakfast. He looked surprised to see me. "Eleanor didn't show up last night," he said before I could ask. "Just never came in. Left us short-handed. Not like her at all. She's never missed a shift." I drove to Eleanor's apartment above the bakery on Main Street. Mrs. Kowalski, who owned the building, met me at the door. She was worried. She'd heard Eleanor's radio playing softly all night, but there'd been no other sounds. No footsteps, no shower running, none of the usual morning routine. The apartment door was unlocked. Inside, everything was neat and tidy. The radio was still playing, some late-night talk show that had been on the air for hours. The bed was made. Eleanor's purse was on the kitchen counter, wallet intact, car keys hanging on their hook by the door. Her uniform from the previous day was folded neatly on a chair. But Eleanor was gone. I stood in that small apartment, breathing in the lingering scent of her perfume and the stale coffee she'd made the morning before, and felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't natural. Somehow, that ledger had known Eleanor Vasquez was going to disappear before it happened. I spent the next week diving deeper into the records. I contacted the state police, the FBI, anyone who might have information about long-term missing persons patterns. What I found disturbed me more than I care to admit. The disappearances weren't random. They followed a pattern, not in timing, but in type. The people who vanished from Millbrook all shared certain characteristics. They were often newcomers to town, people without strong local connections. They were frequently alone, widowed, divorced, or never married. And in almost every case I could verify, they were people who had come to Millbrook looking for a fresh start, running from something in their past. It was as if the town was somehow selecting them, drawing them in, and then claiming them. I found references to the ledger in some very old town documents. A mention in the minutes from a 1923 town council meeting about maintaining the registry as per tradition. A note in the 1867 letter from the mayor to the county seat about proper documentation of natural departures. A 1901 newspaper article about the town's unusually stable population despite the westward migration trend. The more I learned, the more I realized that what was happening in Millbrook wasn't new. It had been going on for generations. And somehow, the ledger was part of it, not just recording the disappearances, but perhaps somehow connected to them in a way I couldn't understand. 3 days after Eleanor Vasquez vanished, I found another new entry. David Marsh, July 18, 1998, left during evening hours, few possessions taken. David Marsh was a carpenter who'd moved to town 6 months ago. Lived in a trailer on the outskirts of town, kept to himself, did good work for fair prices. I drove out to check on him and found the trailer empty but lived in. Tools still scattered around a half-finished cabinet project. A pot of chili still warm on the stove. No David. That night, I sat in the station until well past midnight, staring at the ledger. The building was quiet except for the hum of the old fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of settling wood. Around 2 a.m. I heard something that made my blood run cold. Scratching. Like a pen on paper. I opened the ledger to the last page and watched, my hands trembling, as words appeared in fresh blue ink. Robert Henley, July 22, 1998, will depart before dawn. Robert Henley ran the gas station on the edge of town. A quiet man, recent widower, moved here from Delaware after his wife died of cancer. He lived alone in a small house behind the station. I grabbed my flashlight and radio and drove straight there. The station was closed, as it should be at that hour, but I could see light in the windows of the house behind it. I knocked on the door. Robert answered in his bathrobe, looking confused and sleepy. "Sheriff? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," I lied. "Just making rounds. Everything okay here?" He nodded, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah, everything's fine. Though I've been having the strangest dreams lately. Dreams about walking. Walking somewhere far away." I stayed with Robert until dawn, sitting in his kitchen, drinking coffee, making small talk. I told him I was investigating some break-ins in the area, needed to keep an eye on businesses. He seemed grateful for the company. As the sun came up, Robert stretched and yawned. "You know, Sheriff, I think I might take a little vacation. Haven't been anywhere since Martha died. Maybe drive up to see my sister in Vermont." "That sounds nice," I said, though every instinct I had was screaming danger. "When were you thinking of leaving?" "Oh, probably today. This morning, actually. I've already got some things packed." He gestured toward a small suitcase by the door that I was certain hadn't been there an hour ago. I tried to talk him out of it. Suggested he wait a few days, get someone to cover the station, make proper arrangements. But Robert was adamant. He had to leave today. It was important. He couldn't explain why, but he knew. I followed him to his car, still trying to change his mind. Robert put his suitcase in the trunk and turned to shake my hand. "Thanks for staying with me last night, Sheriff." I don't know why, but it felt like I was saying goodbye to something. He got in his car and drove away. I never saw Robert Henley again. That's when I knew I was dealing with something beyond normal police work. The ledger wasn't just recording disappearances, it was somehow causing them, or predicting them, or maybe there was no difference. I started sleeping at the station, keeping watch over the ledger. Every few days, a new name would appear. Sometimes I could prevent the disappearance by staying close to the person, keeping them occupied, convincing them to leave town for a while. But it only delayed the inevitable. Eventually, they all left. All of them drawn by something they couldn't resist, couldn't explain. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the antique shop, gone while I was at lunch. Jim Reeves, the substitute teacher, vanished during a bathroom break at the school. Sarah Kim, the new librarian, disappeared between the stacks on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Each name appeared in the ledger before they vanished. Each disappearance followed the same pattern: no struggle, no signs of foul play, belongings left behind as if they just stepped out for a moment. And each person had come to Millbrook looking for something: a new start, a quiet place to heal, somewhere to disappear. Except they got more disappearance than they bargained for. I started researching the history of Millbrook itself. What I found in the county archives and old newspaper collections painted a picture of a town that had always been unusual. Founded in 1847 by a group of settlers who claimed they'd been called to the location. The town had prospered briefly in the 1860s, then settled into a pattern of strange stability. The population rarely changed. Families lived here for generations, or they disappeared entirely. There were references to the keeping, in some of the oldest documents, a local tradition or custom that was never fully explained. Town meetings from the 1800s mentioned maintaining the balance and honoring the compact. A 1889 letter from a traveling minister described Millbrook as a place where the very ground seems to hunger for souls. By August, I was barely sleeping. The ledger had become an obsession. I checked it every few hours, dreading the appearance of new names but unable to stop looking. The building felt different at night, older, more alive. Sometimes I could swear I heard whispers coming from the basement, voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. On August 15th, I found 3 new names written in different hands. Catherine Walsh, August 16, 1998, departure scheduled for evening. Michael Torres, August 17, 1998, will answer the call at midnight. Jennifer Abbott, August 18, 1998, morning departure, final. 3 people, 3 consecutive days. I knew all of them. Catherine Walsh was a social worker who'd transferred here from the city. Michael Torres was a mechanic who'd opened a shop on Industrial Road. Jennifer Abbott was a young nurse, fresh out of school, who'd taken a job at the county hospital. I tried to warn them, tried to convince them to leave town immediately. But they looked at me like I was losing my mind, which, honestly, I might have been. Catherine politely declined my suggestion that she take an impromptu vacation. Michael laughed and said he had too much work to do. Jennifer just smiled and said she loved it here in Millbrook, couldn't imagine being anywhere else. All 3 disappeared exactly as the ledger predicted. That night, sitting alone in the station with the cursed book open on my desk, I finally understood what was happening. Millbrook wasn't just a town, it was a trap. A place that drew in the lost and lonely, the people looking for somewhere to belong. And once they were here, once they'd settled in and let their guard down, the town claimed them. The ledger was the record of that claiming. Generation after generation of sheriffs, mayors, town clerks, people in positions of authority who were trusted to maintain the registry, to document the taking, to be complicit in whatever ancient bargain kept Millbrook stable and prosperous while the rest of the world changed around it. I thought about my predecessor, Sheriff Morrison, who'd retired suddenly in 1981 and moved to Florida without explanation. I thought about the sheriff before him, and the one before that. How many of them had sat in this same chair, staring at this same book, watching names appear and people vanish? How many of them had eventually seen their own name written in fresh ink? I kept the ledger locked in my desk and tried to go about my normal duties. But normal didn't exist anymore. Every newcomer to town looked like a potential victim. Every long-time resident seemed to be watching me, waiting to see if I would maintain the tradition or try to break it. The mayor started asking questions. Council members made casual inquiries about my health, my stress levels, whether I might be ready for retirement. The message was clear: keep the registry, document the disappearances, maintain the balance. Or join the names in the book. September came and went. More names, more vanishings. I stopped trying to prevent them. What was the point? If I interfered too much, they'd replace me with someone more cooperative. At least this way, I could bear witness. I could remember the people who were taken, even if no one else would. October brought the first cold snap, and with it, something I'd been dreading. I opened the ledger one morning and found my own name at the bottom of the page. Sheriff Daniel Clayton, October 31st, 1998, final departure, Halloween night. Halloween. Of course it would be Halloween. The night when the boundary between the living and the missing becomes thin. The night when Millbrook's hungry darkness could feed without pretense. I've got maybe 6 hours left. The sun is setting, and I can already feel the pull, that inexplicable urge to walk out of this building, out of this life, into whatever waits in the spaces between the trees and the shadows between the streetlights. I'm leaving this account in the hope that whoever finds it will understand what's been happening here. Maybe they'll be stronger than I was. Maybe they'll find a way to break the cycle, to destroy the ledger, to free the town from whatever compact was made all those years ago. Or maybe they'll just add their own name to the list and keep the registry going for another generation. The ledger is in my desk drawer, locked but not hidden. You'll find the key taped under the bottom right corner. Handle it carefully. Don't read too many names at once. They start to whisper after a while, and once you hear them calling, it's hard to think about anything else. I can hear them now. All of them. Margaret and Thomas and Susan and Eleanor and all the rest, calling from wherever they are, telling me it's not so bad, telling me to come join them, telling me that disappearing is easier than staying. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm tired of being the one who watches and records and remembers while everyone else gets to forget. Maybe it's time to put down the badge and walk into the dark with all the other souls that Millbrook has claimed. The clock on the wall says 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until Halloween officially begins. 13 minutes until my name joins the permanent record of Millbrook's departed. I can see shadows moving outside the station windows. Long, patient shadows that have been waiting for this moment. They're beautiful in their way. Peaceful. They promise an end to responsibility, an end to the weight of knowing things that can't be shared or changed. I'm going to lock this account in the same drawer as the ledger. Maybe someday, someone will find them both and understand. Maybe they'll be the one to finally break the chain. Or maybe in a few weeks, after they've settled into the job and learned to love our quiet little town, they'll open that book and find their own name written in fresh ink, waiting for the appointed time. Time to go. The shadows are getting impatient, and I can hear my name being called from somewhere far away. Somewhere I've never been but somehow remember. Somewhere I belong. Final entry: Sheriff Daniel Clayton, October 31st, 1998, departed willingly into the keeping of Millbrook. This account was found in Sheriff Clayton's desk by his replacement, Sheriff Maria Santos, on November 15, 1998. Sheriff Clayton has been listed as missing since November 1st. The ledger referenced in his account has not been located. Sheriff Santos has reported no unusual incidents in Millbrook since taking the position, and describes it as a quiet, peaceful community where she hopes to serve for many years to come. When the sun went down, there wasn't a single shadow left in this town, and we knew something was coming. I've been wearing this badge for 37 years now, seen things that would make most folks question their sanity. But what happened in Millbrook that October still sits heavy in my chest like a stone I can't cough up. Some nights, when the light hits just wrong through my bedroom window, I catch myself checking the floor beneath my feet, making sure my shadow's still there where it ought to be. It started on a Tuesday. Nothing special about Tuesdays in a place like ours. Population 1,247 on a good day when nobody's moved away. The kind of town where the Dairy Queen closes at 8, and the streetlights have been the same yellow sodium bulbs since Carter was president. Main Street runs exactly 4 blocks before it gives up and becomes County Road, lined with the sort of businesses that hang on through pure stubbornness. Henley's Hardware, the post office that doubles as a bait shop, and the diner where the coffee tastes like it was made sometime last week. I was finishing up paperwork when Mrs. Kowalski came through the door. She had that look people get when they're trying to convince themselves they didn't see what they know they saw. Her hands were shaking as she set down her purse, and she kept glancing over her shoulder like something might be following her. "Sheriff," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something wrong with the Henderson place." The Henderson farm sat about 2 miles outside town proper, where the corn gives way to scrub pine and the road turns to gravel. Old Henrik had died 3 winters back, left the place to a nephew from Portland who never so much as visited. The house had been standing empty since, windows boarded up, paint peeling like sunburned skin. "What kind of wrong?" I asked, though I had a feeling I didn't want to know. She took a shuddering breath. "I was driving past around 4:30, heading home from my sister's. The sun was getting low, you know how it does this time of year. And I saw..." She paused, working her mouth like she was trying to spit out something bitter. "Sheriff, I saw shadows moving around that house. But there wasn't nothing casting them." Now, Mrs. Kowalski wasn't the type to make things up. She'd lived in Millbrook her whole 73 years, raised 4 kids, buried a husband, and ran the church bake sale with military precision. If she said she saw something, she saw something. I drove out there as the sun was setting, that particular October light that makes everything look like it's been dipped in amber. The Henderson place looked the same as always, abandoned, forgotten, slowly surrendering to the encroaching wilderness. But as I sat in my cruiser, engine ticking as it cooled, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There were no shadows. Not mine, not the house's, not the gnarled oak tree that stood sentinel in the front yard. The light was hitting everything just fine, strong and golden, but nothing was casting the dark shapes it should have been. It was like the world had forgotten how to make shadows. I got out of the car and walked closer to the house. My boots crunched on the gravel, but when I looked down, there was nothing but white stones beneath my feet. No dark outline of my body, no proof that I was standing there blocking the light. I held up my hand, twisted it this way and that, but the ground remained stubbornly bright. That's when I heard it. A sound like fabric being dragged across concrete, coming from somewhere behind the house. I followed it around to the backyard, where Henrik used to keep his vegetable garden. The sound was getting louder, more insistent, like something heavy being pulled through dry leaves. But there was nothing there. Just the sound, growing and fading in rhythm, like breathing. I should have left then. Should have gotten back in my cruiser and driven straight to the diner for a cup of that terrible coffee and a slice of pie. Pretended I'd never seen anything stranger than a raccoon in a garbage can. But 37 years of law enforcement had taught me that the things you run from have a way of following you home. The sound stopped as soon as I started walking toward it. The silence that followed was complete. No birds, no insects, no whine through the trees. Even my own breathing seemed muffled, like the air itself had thickened. I pulled out my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the gathering dusk, illuminating the dead garden, the broken fence posts, the weeds that had grown up through Henrik's tomato cages. But the light cast no shadows. My hand holding the flashlight should have thrown a dark silhouette on the ground, but there was nothing. That's when I realized something else was wrong. The beam of my flashlight was moving independently of my hand. While I held it steady, pointing at the garden, the circle of light was sliding slowly across the ground, as if something invisible was guiding it. I let go of the flashlight. It hung in the air for a moment, suspended by nothing, the beam continuing its steady sweep across the yard. Then it dropped to the ground with a metallic clatter, and the light went out. The darkness that followed wasn't natural. It was too complete, too sudden. The kind of darkness that swallows everything, sound, smell, even the feeling of air against your skin. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, couldn't hear my own footsteps as I stumbled back toward where I thought my car might be. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the darkness lifted. The sun hadn't moved. It was still hanging low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. But now there were shadows everywhere. Long, distorted shapes that stretched out from every object like dark fingers reaching across the ground. And every shadow was moving toward the house. I watched my own shadow detach itself from my feet and begin sliding across the gravel, joining the procession of dark shapes flowing toward the Henderson place. Tree shadows, fence post shadows, even the shadow of a rusted wheelbarrow Henrik had left by the garden, all of them moving with purpose, drawn by some invisible force. I should have been terrified. Should have run screaming back to town, locked myself in the station, called for backup from the state police. Instead, I followed my shadow toward the house, fascinated by the impossible thing I was witnessing. The shadows were pooling around the foundation, seeping through cracks in the concrete, flowing under the boarded-up door like dark water. As they disappeared into the house, I could hear sounds from inside, footsteps, the creaking of floorboards, the soft whisper of fabric against wood. Someone was in there. Someone was collecting the shadows. I tried the front door, but it was solid as a bank vault. The boards over the windows were nailed tight, no gaps wide enough to squeeze through. But the sounds inside were getting louder, not footsteps now, but voices. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all talking at once in whispers too soft to understand. I walked around to the back of the house, where a cellar door led down to Henrik's old root cellar. The wooden doors were hanging open, and a steady stream of shadows was flowing down the concrete steps like a river of darkness. The whispers were coming from down there. I'd been in that cellar before, years ago, when Henrik was still alive and complained about kids stealing his apples. It was a simple rectangular room with stone walls and a dirt floor, shelves lined with mason jars full of preserves that never spoiled and vegetables that lasted all winter. Nothing sinister about it, just an old-fashioned way of keeping food fresh before refrigeration. But the whispers made it sound like a cathedral full of secrets. I descended the steps slowly, using the walls to guide me in the darkness. The air grew colder with each step, and the whispers grew louder. By the time I reached the bottom, I could make out individual words, names mostly. The names of everyone who'd ever lived in Millbrook, going back generations. My own name was in there somewhere, mixed in with the others like sugar stirred into coffee. The cellar was larger than I remembered. Much larger. The walls stretched away into darkness, and the ceiling was so high I couldn't see it even when I looked up. The shelves were still there, but they were filled with jars I'd never seen before. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, each one containing something that moved and shifted in the dim light filtering down from outside. As my eyes adjusted, I could see what was in the jars. Shadows. Each jar contained a captured shadow, pressed flat against the glass like a flower in a book. Some were human shapes, men, women, children of various sizes. Others were animals, trees, buildings. All of them moving restlessly within their glass prisons, trying to escape. At the far end of the cellar, barely visible in the gloom, sat a figure on a wooden chair. It might have been human once, but it was hard to tell. The darkness seemed to cling to it like smoke, making its edges indistinct. It was holding something in its lap, a jar larger than the others, still empty. The figure looked up as I approached, and I saw that it had no face. Just smooth skin where features should have been, like a mannequin that had never been finished. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere at once, echoing off the stone walls. "Sheriff," it said, and my name in that voice sounded like a prayer and a curse combined. "You're just in time." The jar in its lap was meant for me. I could see that clearly now, could feel the pull of it like gravity. My shadow, which had been flowing steadily toward the figure, was being drawn into the open mouth of the jar like water down a drain. "Every town needs a collector," the figure continued, its voice never varying in tone or volume. "Someone to gather what others leave behind." Henrik understood this. He kept the shadows safe, kept them organized, made sure they didn't wander where they shouldn't. I tried to speak, to ask questions, but my voice wouldn't come. The jar was almost full now, my shadow compressed and writhing inside the glass like a trapped animal. But Henrik got old, got careless. Let some of them escape. Now they're spread all over town, hiding in corners, growing stronger. Soon they'll be strong enough to walk around on their own, wearing faces that aren't theirs, living lives that don't belong to them. The figure stood up, and I could see that it cast no shadow of its own. Because it was a shadow, wearing the shape of whoever Henrik had been before the collection began. "Your turn now, Sheriff. Your town, your responsibility. The shadows need someone to tend them, someone to keep them contained. Someone they trust." The jar was sealed with a cork that appeared in the figure's hand as if conjured from nothing. My shadow was trapped inside, and I could feel a part of myself going numb, like a limb that had fallen asleep. The figure set the jar on a shelf with the others, and I saw my name appear on a label written in Henrik's careful handwriting. "Don't worry," the figure said, though I hadn't spoken. "You'll get used to it. Time moves differently down here. Seasons pass like days, years like weeks. Before you know it, you'll hardly remember what it was like to cast a shadow of your own." It handed me another jar, this one containing a shadow I recognized, Mrs. Kowalski's silhouette, pressed against the glass with her hands raised as if knocking on a door that wouldn't open. "She saw too much," the figure explained. "Came back here tonight, trying to be helpful. People always think they're being helpful." I tried to fight it, tried to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The shadow that had been Henrik was already fading, its job done, dissolving into the darkness like smoke. And I was taking its place, becoming the keeper of all these captured shapes, the guardian of Millbrook's collective darkness. The worst part wasn't the transformation itself. It was the understanding that came with it, the knowledge that this had been going on for decades, maybe centuries. That every small town had its collector, its keeper of shadows. that the thing we call civilization was just a thin layer over something much older and hungrier. I don't know how long I've been down here. The seasons change above ground, but time doesn't touch this place. I tend the shadows, make sure they don't escape, add new ones when necessary. The collection grows slowly but steadily. Travelers passing through town, residents who ask too many questions, children who wander too far from home and see things they shouldn't. Sometimes I go upstairs, walk around town in the body I borrowed from Henrik, make sure everything looks normal. I wear the sheriff's uniform, answer calls, fill out reports. The townspeople don't seem to notice that I cast no shadow, or if they do, they don't mention it. People see what they want to see, believe what they need to believe. But at night, when the sun goes down and the shadows grow long, I return to the cellar and my collection. Each jar contains a story, a life, a piece of someone who got too close to the truth. I read their shapes like books, learning their histories, their fears, their final moments of understanding. Mrs. Kowalski's shadow still knocks against her jar sometimes, still trying to warn someone who will never hear. The shadow of a traveling salesman from 2 towns over drums its fingers impatiently, still waiting for an appointment it will never keep. A child's shadow plays with toys that exist only in memory. And somewhere in the collection, Henrik's original shadow waits patiently for the day when someone else will take my place, when the burden will pass to another keeper, another guardian of the dark. Because that's how it works in places like Millbrook. The shadows always need collecting, and there's always someone willing to do the job. Someone who thinks they're strong enough, smart enough, brave enough to face the darkness and walk away unchanged. They never are. When the sun went down tonight, I counted the shadows on Main Street. 43 people walking around without the dark companions they should have had. 43 empty spaces where something essential used to be. I'll have to start collecting again soon. The jars don't fill themselves, and the shadows are getting restless. They whisper more loudly now, more urgently, telling me stories of the world above that I'm slowly forgetting. But I remember one thing clearly, the most important thing of all. When the sun goes down in a town like this, when the shadows disappear and the darkness comes calling, you should never, ever try to help. Because some things are meant to stay buried, meant to stay hidden in the spaces between light and dark. And the people who tend those spaces, who keep the boundaries intact, aren't people anymore. We're just the shadows of who we used to be, wearing borrowed faces and keeping the real darkness at bay. At least, that's what I tell myself when the jars start singing at midnight, when the collected shadows try to remember what it felt like to be whole. It's easier than admitting the truth, that maybe we're not keeping the darkness contained at all. Maybe we're just feeding it, one shadow at a time, until it's strong enough to swallow the sun. And on nights like tonight, when I can feel something stirring in the deepest parts of the cellar, something larger and hungrier than anything in my collection, I wonder if that day might be coming sooner than I thought. The shadows know. They always know. And they're getting excited.